My name is Councillor Sabrina Francis and I'm the Mayor of Camden. Welcome to this meeting of the Council, which is being broadcast live. Those of you present in the chamber this evening are reminded to remain seated and to wear a face covering at all times, except when seated in the chamber. Hand sanitizer and antibacterial wipes are available for your use. Some officers and external participants are attending remotely this evening. Those officers and external participants are asked to keep themselves muted with their cameras off except when speaking, and should any officer wish to contribute, please indicate this by using the raise hand function in Teams. Should there be any connection issues and any member of the council does not hear something that a remote participant has said, please raise your hand and I'll ask the remote participant to repeat what he or she has said. All participants in the chamber must use the microphone in front of them every time they speak. This is particularly important as remote participants will not be able to hear you if you are not using the microphone. Please also remember to switch your microphone off as soon as you've finished speaking so that the cameras move to the next speaker. The agenda for the meeting can be found online at camden.gov.uk/democracy. So item 1, the guidance on hybrid meetings. So the first item on the agenda this evening is the guidance on hybrid meetings. Can we all agree this guidance? Again, thank you. Item 2, the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October 2021. Is it your wish that I sign these minutes as a correct record of the meeting? Yeah. Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest by members in relation to items on this evening's agenda. Are there any declarations on any item on the agenda? Councillor Russell.
I'd like to declare an interest in respect of motion 4 as a resident and leaseholder of the Holly Lodge estate, which is mentioned in the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Badlani.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to declare an item conflict of interest in with regard to item 11A, the Treasury Management Report, and I'll step out for that item for avoidance of any risk conflict.
Thank you. Any more? No. Cool. Item 4. We now move to item 4, which is announcements. First one. In addition to the rights by law that the public and press have to record this meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live by the Council on the internet and it can be viewed on our website for 12 months after the meeting. After that time, webcasts are archived and can be made available upon request. If you are addressing the meeting, you are deemed to be consenting to have your contributions recorded and broadcast, and the use of those sound recordings and images for webcasting and or training purposes. Second, in order to reduce the possibility of transmission of COVID-19, I propose that we waive Council Procedure Rule 22, which requires members to sign the attendance book, and that we also agree that members may remain seated when addressing the Council. Moving on. I'm pleased to announce that former leader of the council, Tony Dykes, has been awarded the Order of Companion of O.R. Tambo by the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. The award is for a lifelong commitment to the development of South and Southern Africa. Whilst the award recognises what Tony did over many years as Director of Action for Southern Africa, he also feels that it reflects the stance that Camden Council took against apartheid, giving active support to the anti-apartheid movement and being a founder member of Local Authorities Against Apartheid and its successor, Local Authority Action for Southern Africa. Our congratulations to Tony. On to the Christmas toy appeal. As we all know, Christmas will be a very difficult time for many families in Camden who may be struggling, and kind of more so after the last 18 months we've had. So please support the Mayor's Christmas toy appeal. You can donate new toys, toiletries or gift vouchers or clothes, and please purchase your gifts wherever possible. And you can send them to the office on the second floor or drop them in at reception. Please ensure that any toys have the CE safety mark, and we'll be sending out an email and a poster to remind you all and help you with your collecting. This Thursday is White Ribbon Day. as we were hearing about outside, and I'm sure we'll hear about later. And as a council, we're continuing to support survivors of domestic abuse and their families. Please purchase a white ribbon if you can and wear it as a sign of your support. And then on December 1st is World AIDS Day. So please purchase a red ribbon for World AIDS Day to show your support for people living with HIV and to commemorate those who have died from AIDS-related illnesses. Are there any other announcements? I'm aware that took a while. No? Cool. Item 5 is communications. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Madam Mayor, we've apologies from councillors APAC, Fulbrook, Mulholland, Rahman, Reaver, Robertson, Simpson, Singh, Tahiri, Tawari and Councillor Vincent, and apologies for lateness from Councillor High and Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies from the floor? No, quite an extensive list. Item 6 is deputations. I have accepted 2 deputation requests in respect to this evening's meeting, and the deputation statements are contained in the supplementary agenda. Firstly, we'll hear from Lorna Greenwood on community safety measures in public spaces. Lorna, you have 3 minutes to address the council. An officer will be timing you, and they'll indicate when your time is over by saying time.
I think that's on now, yeah. Okay, my name's Lorna Greenwood, I'm 33 and I live in the northwest of the borough. I'm making a deputation to the council today calling specifically for safety measures to be improved on enclosed pathways in my area and across the borough, where there is no passive surveillance and effectively nowhere to go if you feel unsafe. I'm also calling on the council to ensure the safety of women and girls is prioritised when decisions are being made on planning, designing and maintaining public spaces and walking routes. Last month, I saw a brave report on Nextdoor from a local woman who'd been sexually assaulted by a man on the Black Path in West Hampstead. This was in broad daylight, and many women and girls in the community, including myself, have been avoiding this route between Broomsey Street and West Hampstead Thamesink Station due to safety fears. Women and girls shouldn't have to make changes to our daily lives to feel safe. We shouldn't have to be accompanied home or take a deep breath before embarking on a journey alone. I've lost count of the number of times I've walked home alone at night after weighing up the risk against a taxi fare with my keys between my fingers because someone once told me this would help with self-defence. On one such occasion, a quiet Sunday evening, having rolled the dice in my head and decided that a short 12-minute journey from Kilburn Station to my home in Fortune Green should be safe, I was followed home by a car full of men. They drove behind me initially, slowly but revving. As I crossed the road, they pulled past me and then reversed back towards me. Although I was only a very short distance from my home, I was literally around the corner, it felt too dangerous to carry on walking, particularly as they had stopped the car, got out and were shouting at me, and I was terrified. Thankfully, this happened in a residential area, and I took refuge with a neighbour who I'd never met before. I hid in their garden initially, then when the shouting continued, I rang the doorbell, then banged on the window until they let me in. Looking back, this action itself was a risk as I didn't know whose door I was knocking on. They were so kind, and having checked the men were gone, walked me the short way back to my home. There's no such refuge on the Black Path or the nearby Wayne Kirkham Way, which is another enclosed path in the community connecting the Sidings estate with Mill Lane, which has had faulty lighting and been overgrown. I spoke with a young resident from Sidings last year who said she didn't feel safe to walk this path alone to secondary school and was being walked by her father. As someone who's generally averse to extensive surveillance in society, I do feel strongly that CCTV can be effective and impactful in providing reassurance and a sense of security in specific areas. So I'm really pleased to see that this has now been implemented in the past week on the Black Path, further to the incident in October. However, I still believe that enclosed paths such as these two in Fortune Green and others across the borough would benefit from more investment in safety measures to make women and girls feel safe. At a minimum, the regular cutting back of overgrowth, but in addition, proper working lighting, security mirrors and CCTV for particularly problematic areas. This would not only act to make women and girls feel safe, but also act as a deterrent for future crime. The onus shouldn't be on us as women and girls to make changes to our daily lives or navigate a series of risk assessments in our heads just to get home safely. The onus should be on ensuring women and girls feel safe to go about their daily lives in society.
Thank you. Does any member wish to ask a question? Councillor Olszewski, you had your hand up pretty speedily. Anyone else?
Madam Mayor, that was a very powerful personal testimony to the harassment that many women suffer. And I was pleased that the council responded very quickly to not just my demands, but the demands of women in the Fortune Green area when they heard about the sexual assault last month on the Black Path. And there are now a couple of cameras in place which will go some way to give women reassurance. And I think it was a point well made that it shouldn't be down to women to react to threats on their safety and so on. So I wonder if Lorna has any further thoughts on what the council or other agencies like the police could do to help reassure women on their safety, take practical action and so on, so that it's organisations like the council and the police that are doing something, and of course eventually men too, to change their behaviour and not just women.
Were there any other questions? Because we can take them together. Pip to the post, Councillor Hickson.
Thank you. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I just wanted to say what an incredibly brave statement. And I think what's really sad about this is how many people in this room will have experienced really similar things. And it's incredible that you're speaking out. And I just hope that we take action before someone else gets hurt, because too often action is only taken when it's not a feeling terrified, when somebody doesn't manage to get to safety. So I realise you're speaking. Obviously, there has been a horrible incident, and I really hope now action is taken, but I hope in other situations action is taken before it gets that far. But mostly I just wanted to absolutely applaud your bravery tonight, because I think it's incredible.
Councillor Cooper.
Great, thank you very much. I'm not going to expand on what Councillor Hickson said, but thank you to Lorna for bringing this deputation. I think one thing, in addition to those secluded spots that are overlooked and difficult to have passing people in because of the nature of those secluded paths like the Black Path and Kirkham Way, I think it's important for us as a council to look at whether we can have, through our designing out crime policies and the planning policy that you correctly mentioned, Lorna, a specific approach to making sure there's natural surveillance, so that we make sure that we drain the swamp and deprive people that are going to abuse women in our society of the sense of impunity in any nooks and cranny that exist. And it'd be really useful, as well as hearing those two particular places that you've mentioned and one where action has been taken, also other concerns in other areas about where you think there's not that natural surveillance that robs people of the sense of impunity, because as we'll hear more, I'm sure, later, that misogyny and violence and harassment of women is an ever-present thing in society that we need to deprive any nook and cranny of.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Really, the police could do nothing apart from just reassure me and, well, comfort me, actually, because I was very upset when I called them. And I think that's really difficult, because then you have to kind of go back to walking that same route again and knowing that those people are still out there and could potentially do the same thing. So I think and again, I really don't want to have to change my daily life to account for that. But, actually, when I spoke to the police, they said, get the bus. The bus stops at the end of my road, or where I used to live in Fortune Green. I've moved now, but it stopped at the end of the road. And so it was still the same stretch of road where this happened. So getting the bus wouldn't have actually made a difference. So I think it's having real reassurance that, the police and maybe even the council are taking action on these things by raising awareness, communicating with women and girls, showing that taking these issues seriously, not just letting paths get overgrown, not just letting lighting slide as a small issue. It's not. It has so much more of a bigger ramification on making people feel safe in their daily day-to-day. I mean, another example, the lights were out on Minster Road when I was walking to work one morning, really early, really dark, and it just made me feel so uncomfortable and unsafe. And I did call the council and tell them, but it's just small examples of things in planning and in maintenance of the public spaces we have that can make such a difference in making people feel reassured and safe. And then in response to Maria, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I haven't actually, this actually happened to me about over a year ago, but I just haven't actually shared it before. And I think with stories recently and, incidents of violence against women and girls going up so massively during the pandemic, and also stories like Sarah Everard and just walking home, really. I think it's just I can really relate to it. And I think I was very lucky, actually, and I don't know what could have happened, but I think that I'm sure multiple women have multiple stories similar to that. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And also, Councillor Cooper, I was going to say, I think I did read in the Camden New Journal last week about Reclaim These Streets had mentioned about the canal in Camden being an area that has seen an increased rate of antisocial behaviour. So that could be potentially another area, but I don't know any other specific examples, but I don't think it's specific to Fortune Green.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite the Cabinet Member for Safer Communities, Councillor Shah, to respond to the deputation. You have 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Lorna, for sharing your story and for bringing this deputation. It's an incredibly important deputation, and it describes the lived experience of many women. I think Councillor Higgins touched on that, who are the victims of sexual offending and misogynistic behaviour on a daily basis. All too often, it's us, the women, who are left feeling as though we're the ones who need to take action and change our behaviour. And there needs to be a whole change across our society. This is systemic change that challenges entrenched misogynistic offending behaviour and encourages men to become our allies, helping to deliver that societal change that we're looking for. Change requires sustained action informed by understanding of what the data is telling us, sharing that intelligence and identifying that offending behaviour, and listening to what women and our wider communities are telling us about their lived experience, like you've done today. And we taking the action to address the issues of concern in specific locations across Camden. So we've developed the Women's Safety, the Public Realm Action Plan as a council in partnership with the Met Police, and this has 3 priorities. 1 is tackling that offending behaviour. 2 is working with licensing and the evening and nighttime economy. And 3, very much managing the public realm environment. I share the view with you that the investment in public realm is really important in areas such as the Black Path and other locations around the borough, and we are taking action to address this. We know that CCTV and improved lighting will help, but it won't be the end, and it might not deliver the outcomes that we all want. However, improving that along with the action to design out the crime will make a difference, and they will help make our public spaces a safer environment. I should add that environmental community safety audits are being carried out in the areas outlined in your deputation, and action will be taken to deliver those improvements. I strongly believe that with the action plan combined with the increased level of Met Police resourcing coming into Camden from December onwards, outlines our commitment towards doing all we can to tackle the gender-based offending behaviour. It provides a focused set of actions that we as Camden Council will work towards. And you mentioned planning and you mentioned other things like roads and things like that. And I'm working with Danny and Adam to look at how we can improve the safety of women holistically throughout the community service for the public realm. So thank you again, Lorna.
Thank you, Councillor Shah, and thank you again, Lorna. Our second deputation is from Dr Vivian Howard on behalf of Climate Emergency Camden and Extinction Rebellion Zero Waste in relation to the forthcoming award by the North London Waste Authority of a contract to build a new waste disposal facility in North London. Dr Howard, you have 3 minutes to address the Council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the opportunity to do this. I think there should be some slides. I want to talk about the two factors about this incinerator. One is a local problem, which is particles, and the other is a global problem, which is persistent chemicals. I'm a medical doctor, I'm a pathologist, I specialized in toxicology, and I've published in both these fields. So particles are, I don't know whether, can you see the slides, Madam Mayor?
No,
Are
we
the
can't
slides?
see them.
Oh, well, I have, I did give a presentation to be shown. Particles are regulated by their mass, but what we know is from health problems that the smallest particles, the nanoparticles, which weigh almost nothing, are the most potent ones at causing disease. And these are the most difficult to abate. And therefore, we know that these point sources of energy production are major sources of these very small particles. And whatever abatement they have on the incinerator, it will let these very smallest particles through. And these will therefore add to any exceedances you have of local air quality. There is no known safe dose of exposure to small particles that's been measured in many studies, and it's acknowledged. The other thing that is not mentioned in any of the applications is something called de novo synthesis. So as the cooling gases leave the stack, they will form particles anyway after they've been past the abatement things, and that will add to the pollution burden as well. So the other thing I want to talk about is persistent chemicals, and the ash is a source of dioxin which is never discussed. So this plant will produce these persistent chemicals, including dioxins. They may well abate what's coming out of the stack, but an incinerator working to the Waste Incineration Directive, for each ton of waste burnt will produce 550 nanograms of dioxin. However, the bottom ash, that is the clinker that's left over, will produce 30 times that. And this stuff is said to be safe, and it can be used to make building materials and roads. So I would like to just affirm that whatever is claimed by the proposers, these will produce aerosols of small particles, and they will produce large amounts of persistent chemicals, and these will have effects on health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr Howard. Does any member wish to ask a question of the Deputy? Everyone. Cool. Councillor Berry.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. To the deputies, your written deputation statements gives the information that the Mayor of London's office has forecast that will actually be 950,000 tonnes above the energy from waste, the incinerator capacity that London might actually require once this is added to the mix. Given that we don't seem to be in danger of imminent lack of incinerator space, are you asking the council, therefore, to think again about the Edmonton incinerator and potentially cancel it, or put a smaller proposal forwards? Is that what you're effectively asking the cabinet member to say?
I'll take a few more and then you can answer them in one go. Councillor Badlani, and then I'll go Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the Deputy. And I appreciate the research that you and team put into understanding this issue, because it is complex, and I think it's been great to have you come to the Cultural Environment Security Committee, where I'm a member. My question is around recycling more broadly and around reducing waste. Despite best efforts, and I realise some of it representing Bloomsbury Ward in the south, we've got such a transient population, we've really struggled to get recycling rates up high. I'd welcome your thoughts on what we do to deal with this waste, because unfortunately, whatever the council's best efforts have been, they've not been, and no in the London Borough has solved this. And I just welcome your views on what we should do with the waste if we can't get recycling rates higher.
Councillor Cooper, and then I'll go back to the Deputy.
Thank you for the deputies for bringing this deputation and for bringing previous deputations on this subject. It's very important to shed a light on it. Obviously, North London Waste Authority, we are but one council in that consortium, but it's important that we scrutinise it as if it were part of this council, because we are responsible for the environment and also the economic impact of it. Obviously, we're at a very late stage in the contracting process, but only one bidder, as you point out in the deputation statement, has come forward and progressed to this point. That will have serious impact, in my view, on the competitiveness of the tender that they've made and the impact economically as well as environmentally on this council. In point 3 of your sort of step 2 in the deputation statement, you mentioned the cost of construction, you say new taxes, etc. in step 4. Obviously, there's going to be a significant economic or fiscal impact on the council if, as Councillor Berry said, we are over-providing on that site. Do you have an order of magnitude figure in your mind for how much this council might be spending that over-provides for something that environmentally, in your view at least, is not required?
Dr. Howard, would you like to respond to those ones? And then if we have time, I'll go to some other councillors who also had questions for you.
Yes, thank you. I understand that there's an incinerator south of the river, an 800,000 tonne per year. I'm just trying to remember its name. It's Bell something too, which is not in the London plan, and that's why it hasn't been taken into account for assessing the total requirement. And waste arisings are set to fall, and I take the point of the councillor that there definitely seems to be an over capacity with this proposal for the incineration of waste. And I think that's a thing that should be considered very carefully.
Thank you. We had a few more questions, so I will go to them because you all put your hands up. But if you could be brief, that would be helpful. Councillor Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'd like to ask about the nanoparticles. Have you made any estimate at all of the area that these nanoparticles would be spread over? I'm assuming that when they go up the stack, they will go out in a plume over London. And I think I'm just asking if you've made any estimate as to where the plume might go, or thank you.
The only information, the only information that we get is of the weight of particles, and to estimate the number of very small particles, you need to know the size distribution, and I don't have that information. Otherwise, it could be calculated. But they can travel a long distance. But my point is that you have exceedances of the regulatory levels for particles in London regularly, mainly around busy traffic spots. And these emissions will add to that, so they can only push those upwards.
Thank you. I'll next go to Councillor Pearson and then Councillor Olad.
Thank you very much. My questions were also going to be related to your written deputation. I have many questions, but I'll limit them. You referred to plants about to be constructed south of the river. I believe there's a company called Corey who are going to be providing 1.4 million tonnes worth of capacity, which is roughly double what the North London waste would do. So there does seem to have been a lack of coordination of the various projects to construct these incinerators, and that's probably led to Councillor Berry's point about what the Mayor has commented. Also, I wonder what the effect would be, because Camden has an ambition to be plastic-free Camden, and many manufacturers and supermarkets are aiming to cut out packaging as far as possible or altogether. I wonder what that effect would be on the output of the incinerator. My final point, it may be more for one of our representatives on the North London Waste Authority, that in section, on page 49 and 56 of our agenda tonight, it states that the North London Waste Authority is proposing in the next few months to go out and borrow between 800 million and 850 million pounds to finance this project. And I wondered why that was necessary in the next few months, when I would have thought the cost of the project was going to be spread over the whole construction period of however many years it is. So, thanks.
Thank you. I will go to Councillor Olad just because I said I called you before.
Do you know what? I was going to ask a question about capacity, but it's been answered, so don't worry about it.
Was Councillor Porritt, so I'll squeeze you in instead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also wanted to pick up on the point about recycling rates and ask the person who gave the deputation whether he has any ideas of what we can learn from other London boroughs, because Councillor Madlani made the point about there being a poor performance across London generally, but actually we are performing worse than other boroughs. We're below the London average for recycling rates. So is there a way that we can improve this based on what you've seen happening in other boroughs so that we can reach that aspiration of not having to turn to dirtier methods of getting rid of our waste in the future?
Dr. Howard, if you'd like to respond to some or all of those questions.
Yes, thank you, Madam. The reduction of plastic in the waste stream will reduce the calorific value of the feed. And we know that's happening, and that's going to go apace. I think they're already talking about passing legislation to reduce one-time use plastics. So we can see that coming downstream. So that will reduce the requirement for incineration, because plastics do form a large part of it. I think that recycling, there are going to be incentives for recycling, and that is a reason to think that this incinerator probably isn't going to be necessary. Another thing I'd just like to mention briefly is that the proposal doesn't meet the World Health Organization emission limits for particles. So there are multiple reasons. But I think the increase in recycling and the reduction in waste by legislation is going to affect the need for incineration, and I'm sure that we're over-provided for.
Thank you. I would now like to invite the Cabinet Member for a Sustainable Camden, Councillor Harrison, to respond to the deputation. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. At the heart of this, there is a question about responsibility, and responsible was, I think, a word Councillor Cooper used. We live in a very consumerist society. We all contribute to the production of waste. We have a responsibility to dispose of what we create. And for the purpose of this council, we're familiar with us as a local authority collecting the waste, but we also have a responsibility via the North London Waste Authority to dispose of it. So we have to think very carefully about how we do that. And the best starting point for that is to apply circular economy principles as far as you can. And in doing that, you certainly rule out landfill because of how damaging that is. And you look at what the options are currently. And there is a current facility that does some of what the future facility will do, except it doesn't do it in as an environmentally friendly way as possible. What the future facility will do in a circular economy sense will extract energy from the waste and ensure that something is reused, but from all the stuff that we all throw away. In terms of the methods that are used, these are they are world-leading methods in terms of looking after air quality. Around half of the equipment within the site will be dedicated to cleaning what's emitted, and it is being designed with carbon capture and storage in mind to assist us in our future climate goals. There has been some confusion created by the planning inspector's approval of a facility in South London. It's certainly not my position, I don't think it should be anyone's position, that what our facility would be publicly owned, managed and run and funded through the Public Works Loans Board. We should not be giving away to a privately run facility somewhere else in London just because they wish to make some money out of it. We need to keep it in public hands and aim for the highest possible standards. It is a weakness of regional policy. Councillor Pearson was alluding to that. It's a shame that the Mayor of London isn't able to control that more greatly, but the Mayor of London does specifically state and name the Edmonton site in his environment strategy, and that's worth also remembering. It's not quite fully about recycling, but it is worth remarking and remembering also that Camden is actually 6th out of the 14 inner London boroughs, so we're at the upper end of the parts of the city where it's more difficult to recycle. And some of the decisions we've taken in previous years have contributed to that, and we may have a further debate about that later on. So ultimately, we need to be taking responsibility for what we produce, undertaking all efforts possible to minimise what we use and minimise the impact on our environment. This is a site that will have the most up-to-date recycling facilities possible, allowing us to extract materials for reuse. It will be by far the greenest energy recovery facility in the country. And as I say again, given the nature of the economy we have, it's the responsible way forward to handle these materials in the most environmentally friendly way available to us.
Thank you. I think that was bang on time. Thank you for your deputations, and thank you, Councillor Harrison. Thank you. We now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is our themed debate on violence against women and girls. The Cabinet Member for Best Start for Children and Families and the Cabinet Member for Safer Communities will introduce the report, and we will then hear from our external speakers. After this, councillors may make comments, and then finally the Cabinet Members will sum up. An officer will be timing each of your contributions and will indicate when your allotted time is over by saying time. Can I now call upon Councillors Mason and Shah to introduce the report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're having this debate today on violence against women and girls because I think we all believe we've reached a watershed moment. As Lorna's earlier brave testimony shows, male violence and abuse is endemic in our society, and things are getting worse, not better, and indeed did get worse during the most intense period of the pandemic. The dial is going in the wrong direction. Challenging gender-based violence and abuse has to be an absolute priority for this council, but also for the police, for our courts, for our health service, for our voluntary sector and our schools. And unless we all work together in a coordinated way, we will not make the advances that we should. Some people know that nearly 50 years ago I set up with other women in Camden the first refuge in Camden, the second one I think in the country. And for those 50 years, Camden Council has actually supported a refuge in Camden. And more recently, we've also invested and do invest 1.2 million in support of our Camden safety net, which you heard about earlier. But I think we absolutely, and I should say that that money has never been cut during the whole period of austerity. But I think we do need to move from just supporting victims and survivors to actually trying to prevent violence against women and girls, to call out misogyny, to call out toxic masculinity, to punish perpetrators where that is necessary, and to rehabilitate them where that is possible. In March this year, I took a report to Cabinet arguing that there should be much stronger cross-council coordinated action on violence against women and girls. And I'm pleased that as a result of that, at least we now have a housing policy, a domestic violence and abuse housing policy for our council tenants. But obviously there's much, much more to be done. And I was absolutely delighted that the Women's Forum and Helen Reardon-Bond, who you'll hear from later, did an investigation into domestic violence and abuse, hearing lots of evidence, and have produced, in my view, a very strong report with several strong recommendations for the Council to take action. I'm going to hand over now to Councillor Shah, but can I, just before I stop speaking, can I thank everybody, all the speakers, external speakers who've come to the Council meeting today. And I think together we can say no to domestic violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. So we've been working conscientiously to ensure we're doing our best to create a safer society for women and to hold men accountable for their actions. Councillor Mason has been leading on the work on the domestic violence and I on the safety in the public realm. I think for too long now, conversations have been centred around the actions women need to take to protect themselves rather than placing the onus on tackling male violence. Our male allies play a vital role towards achieving the objective of tackling violence against women and girls and preventing it from taking place for future generations. Our approach must be coordinated and we must recognise the root cause, misogyny and gender inequality. I'd urge our male allies here today not to let this fall in their priorities and make it part of daily life, doing your bit in small ways and bigger ways to promote gender equality. Women have the right to live, work and socialise day or night. However, individual acts of male-perpetrated violence reflect a pattern which creates a climate of fear and control. Deaf and disabled women, women from BAME backgrounds and LGBTQ women are even more likely to experience harassment, discrimination and abuse. Women from diverse backgrounds experience abuse differently and male power is used against them differently. Women living in poverty are particularly vulnerable to experiencing violence and face disproportionate challenges in accessing the necessary support to make them safe. The lack of access to secure housing, precarious employment, difficulty accessing social security, and poverty work to keep women in abusive situations. Street harassment and violence against women is endemic in the UK. We are thought to live in a civilised society by the rest of the world. But with 80% of women of all ages having been sexually harassed in public, 1 in 2 women sexually harassed in their workplace, 1 in 5 being raped in their lifetime, with 3% of cases ever being heard in court. We have done some work so far in Camden. There is more to do. As we've mentioned, violence against women and girls is a priority within Camden, and a range of work has been taking place in this area across services. We continue to lobby for misogyny to be formally recognised within the definition of hate crime, including misogyny as a priority issue within the No Place for Hate Communications campaign. We've established a Women's Safety Public Realm Action Plan, specifically focused towards addressing gender-based violence and antisocial behaviour in the public realm, and we're working with our police colleagues on gender-based crime and ASB. We've written to the Mayor of London to encourage the return of the night tube, as the tube offers a means of well-lit travel with CCTV and staff stations. Last week, Councillor Harrison and I prepared a letter to the Mayor of London and Transport for London to welcome the return of the night tube on the Central and Victoria lines. We've been holding borough-wide walkabouts across Camden for women's safety, and as part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, I would invite you all on the 3rd of December to come on and attend our walkabout. I look forward to hearing from our speakers during the debate, and I thank everyone for attending tonight.
Thank you, councillors. Our first speaker this evening is Helen Reardon-Bond of Camden Women's Forum. Helen, you have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. As has been said, the pandemic and the murders of Sarah Everard, Sabina Nasa, and closer to home, potentially Nicole Hurley, have brought into sharp relief the epidemic of violence against women. This has left girls and women feeling really unsafe on streets in Camden, in their own homes, and it also blights the lives of our children that live here. Camden's Women's Forum launched its second inquiry into domestic violence and abuse last November, so before these horrific murders. The forum has worked really closely with officers, service providers, experts and professionals to produce our forthcoming report, and I'd like to really thank the members of the forum for giving their time freely to this. Key to this has been the Hope Survivors group, which is funded by Camden and established by them, who have shared their really traumatic experiences. And as I've said earlier, their voices have shaped our recommendations. But very unfortunately, these women have had to constantly repeat their experiences over and over again because they're not believed. And this is particularly acute for Black, Asian and minority ethnic women. As I said earlier, 1 in 5 women would have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. So you're probably sitting next to some woman who has experienced violence but won't talk about it. As Angela said, our recommendations are far-ranging. I just thought I'd give you a flavour of some of them. This includes setting up a Violence Against Women and Girls Board to ensure delivery and join up across the different services, commissioning a legal service, more support for advice in schools and training, and I should actually note some fantastic work is already going on in our schools around this. Mandatory domestic violence training for council staff and promoting really fantastic organisations like Solace, Gallup, Hopscotch and the literally the life-saving Camden Safety Net network. We also need to champion reforms at national level and work across political divides to ensure sustainable change. I just want to pay tribute to Camden for actually setting up the forum in the first place. I know a lot of people think that gender equality is done. Well, it certainly isn't. I'd like to thank the members. I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to say a special tribute to the Camden New Journal for their special issue last week on this topic. And also I'd like to say to the CEO, you should be really proud of your staff. I'd particularly like to say a big shout out for Joe Brown, John Rowley over there, who's spoken about his own experience, if you don't mind me saying, John, and also Florence Henry. The staff in Camden have really thrown their weight behind this report, and I really believe with the delivery board that we'll be able to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I now call on Kalina Shah, the Solace Women's Aid Refuge Manager, to speak? You also have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Kalina from Solace Women's Aid. I manage the refuges in Camden. For those of you who don't know, a refuge is for women and children who've fled domestic violence to come there for about 6 to 9 months, during which they receive intensive casework support from caseworkers and a family support worker. During this time, the women are helped with immigration, access to benefits, housing, counselling, and also through our own internal Arise programme to heal from the trauma that they've suffered. One of the issues, or many issues, that we have in terms of refuge is access and trying to be more inclusive to the people that can access refuge. One of the groups that we know may not be able to access refuge as easily is people who have no recourse to public funds. A lot of them aren't able to be sponsored by social services or other organisations to access coming into refuge, and that often means that they end up staying in those domestic abuse environments, or not able to leave and unable to receive support. As well as that, women who are in full-time education or work often don't come to the refuge, or are unwilling to, due to the fact that they would have to end up paying rent and service charge themselves. That puts another barrier on them accessing these vital services. So I think our recommendation is trying to find provision and funding for these groups, that so they can receive support that is vital to them and their children. As well as those groups, transgender women, also there's a lack of provision for those groups as well. It's sometimes quite difficult to have a transgender person in a shared environment. It brings a lot of complexity. So trying to find a way that we can support women who've been through domestic abuse and sexual abuse for these groups as well. I think as well as that, then we have seen a lot of increased referrals during the pandemic, with women coming with higher complexity needs that cannot be managed in a low to medium support generic refuge, and there isn't anywhere else for us to refer the women into who have high mental health and substance use needs, and that often means that they aren't receiving the vital support that they require.
Thank you. Can I now call on Benifer Bandari of Hopscotch to speak? You also have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you very much. My name is Benifer. I'm the CEO of Hopscotch Women's Centre. Hopscotch supports women on the intersection of gender and racial inequity. Our staff mostly have legal or therapeutic training, and many of our staff have experienced misogynistic violence, including myself. We proudly signed this year the Employers' Domestic Abuse Covenant, EDAC, and I urge you all to look this up and encourage your own organisations to do the same. We work in a fully trauma-informed way, and I'm part of a network to make Camden and Islington trauma-informed boroughs. Good practice isn't always present when we really need the whole of Camden Council to work in a trauma-informed way. Last year, Hopscotch saw a 3-fold increase in referrals classed as multiple complex needs. Council departments like housing often struggle to communicate with victims of abuse appropriately. Statements like, "Don't keep calling us, we'll call you," that's harmful when your life is at risk and those of your children are at risk. We need a different approach and a review of policies and processes. I understand this is on its way, and I really hope that it works to benefit those who are most vulnerable in this borough. Equally, we need enhanced understanding in cases like modern-day slavery, or so-called honour-based violence, which just don't tick normal boxes of abuse. Our advocates spend so much precious time explaining abuse so that the needs are met of women in a timely way to save suffering. I want to talk about Wahida. Wahida's one of our VAWG advocates who works 40 hours a week. We have funding for, and therefore pay her only for 28 hours a week. Unfortunately, she's not the exception in this field. Wahida is determined that her referrals from Camden Safety Net are met, and her preventative awareness building work isn't cut, because every year her funding is at risk. Sometimes at night, when I just can't sleep, I feel like the funding system actually abuses VAWG services. Sabrina, who handles multiple complex need cases, looks after women on a weekly basis who find themselves involved with gangs, in drugs, in crime, in prostitution. This is essential work, it's frontline work, and it's funded only for 12 months at a time, sometimes only month by month. Many local authorities by this time of year have zero budget for VAWG work, when there should be long-term consistent commissioning for specialist organisations like Hopscotch, like Solace, who have been doing this work on a shoestring for decades. We need to be able to expand and contract our work in an agile way. Instead, we struggle to keep incredible humans like Wahida and Sabrina in their essential work, providing trauma-informed care and support for the most vulnerable women of Camden.
Thank you. Can I now call on Chief Superintendent Andy Carter of the Metropolitan Police to speak? You also have 3 minutes to address the Council.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Andy Carter, the Borough Commander for Camden. As outlined by the Commissioner again recently, tackling violence remains the Met's #1 priority, and therefore it is mine as well. Now, I recognise that recent appalling events have shone a light on how much we as a police force must do with our partners to prevent future tragedies and to tackle predators. We've heard already tonight about the cases of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, but I'm glad that we also were able to remember Nicole Hurley here in Camden, who lost her life, and a man will be facing trial for her murder next year. I know that every day my teams are working tirelessly to combat violence perpetrated by men against women and to improve and build confidence in the Met and to making women safer and feel safe in this borough and across the capital. To reassure our communities, we have stepped up our patrols of open spaces, and specifically in Camden, where our nighttime economy is at its busiest, increasing police presence in key locations through our intelligence. And we will be enhancing this further, not with one, but with 2 town centre teams, the first going live covering Camden Town next month, and the second in the next year covering Bloomsbury and the area south of the Euston Road. I know that many people are really dismayed and disappointed with us as an organisation. And since I arrived 10 weeks ago, I have sought to understand who is most affected and therefore where we need to focus our efforts to rebuild that trust and confidence. We are focused on raising professional standards of our officers and staff and rooting out those who display unacceptable behaviour. I know the Met is far from perfect, but I do know that it is capable and caring, and it is full of people who are good and who work all their lives to protect others. Every day, virtually, officers on this command put themselves at risk. They're abused and they're assaulted, but undaunted, they do continue and they do care. Initiatives such as working with licensed venues, Ask the Angela scheme, developing a local problem profile so we better understand our challenging areas, supporting the Safe Streets initiative and the Walk and Talk initiative, whereby women are joining officers on patrol, will all make a difference. To reaffirm our commitment, the Met has recently released a new violence against women and girls plan that will make a tangible difference to women's safety in London, and there are 4 themes within that plan. Much of this work is already happening, so we're building on that. The work will include protecting women and girls in public spaces at home and online, so that's increased policing presence, preventing nighttime violence, and increasing officer training and capability to respond to violence against women. Secondly, working with our partners and with women to improve prevention and victim care by engaging with women and girls responding to their feedback, increasing prevention and improving victim care and support with partners. Thirdly, bringing offenders to justice and improving the criminal justice outcomes for victims by targeting and managing offenders and improving response and investigation. And the last one, improving the Met's culture and professional standards. That's through the review being led by Baroness Casey of Blackstock, and upholding our professional standards through our Rebuilding Trust Plan, and also furthering gender representation across the commands at all levels. My dedication to the residents of Camden means that I only want the best, and I will always act when our employers fall below the standards that we and the public expect. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to updating you on the progress being made.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I now call on Ella Schlesinger, Head of Sixth Form at Parliament Hill School, to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Hi everyone. So I'm Ella Schlesinger. I am the Director of SICK at Parliament Hill School, but I also am the Director of the SWAP Consortium. And I was going to talk a little bit through some of the work that we have done in response to some of the cases that we've heard about tonight, but also to two other kind of pieces of work that have taken place in the national picture. So the Everyone's Invited website, which became quite I guess, famous last summer, and also the Ofsted report into sexual abuse in schools. Both of those things, in addition to the kind of student response to many of those cases we've heard about tonight, really kind of added an urgency to the work that we were wanting to do. And that has meant that we've really tried to work with the student body to really place student voice at the heart of the work that we're doing, in order for the kind of taught curriculum to have real meaning, for the students to feel that they had ownership over that work, but also that it was relevant. Lots of the feedback that we get from the student body is that maybe their teachers are slightly out of date with the things that we are talking about. And so lots of the work about placing students at the heart of our kind of planned curriculum was to really hear from them about the issues that they experience. So the Ofsted report really made explicit lots of the things that we've already heard about, but that the majority of our female students will experience sexual abuse of some sort at their time during their time at school. And although I work in a girls' school 11 to 16, I work in a mixed sixth form where there are boys as well, and that we know that boys are the perpetrators of the majority of the abuse. Our starting point was to engage with the report, but then to also think about all our different stakeholders and to really make sure that we established very early on some guiding principles that everyone felt comfortable with. And those principles were kind of worked on with our student council in the sixth form, with our governors, with our tutors, with designated safeguarding leads, as well as kind of the key leads within the sixth form. And at the heart of those principles were the idea that we wanted students to be very much involved in the planning of any curriculum opportunities to address these issues, that we would have a listening culture that was established so that victims of abuse felt that they could come forward as much as possible and talk to us. As one of the real kind of points in the report was around, which we've heard around tonight, is around the fact that even if abuse takes place outside of school or within school, that victims often feel that they can't come and discuss those issues openly. We also wanted to have in our guiding principles some work around how we would support and educate perpetrators of abuse. And we're now in the stage where we're going to hear back from the students very much about how they want us to proceed.
Thank you. And can I now call on Leah Jewett of Outspoken Sex Ed to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. How do we tackle violence against women and girls? A sign from the candlelight vigil after the murder of Sarah Everard pointed the way. It had the phrase, "Protect your daughter," crossed out and written underneath it, "Educate your son." Parents are their children's first and main educators, and they're sex educators, the missing link in their sex education. These days, sex ed incorporates topics like body image, LGBT+ identities, sexting, porn, gender stereotypes, pleasure, and consent. And they're all interrelated. When I co-founded the social enterprise Outspoken Sex Ed in 2018 to get parents talking openly with their children about sex and relationships, 2 things shocked me. 1, the 2016 Women and Equalities Committee report on how prevalent sexual harassment and sexual violence were in schools. And 2, the fact that from 2013 to 2017, child-on-child sexual abuse rose by 71%. What springs to mind as a probable factor is porn, 88% of which is said to be violent or degrading towards women, and how it might influence children and young people's sexual development, attitudes, and behavior. I believe that the accessibility of porn is the genie out of the bottle that has sparked people the world over to acknowledge that porn is now sex education by default. The antidote is critical thinking and talking openly. Outspoken Sex Ed was founded on the premise that talking openly at home helps with safeguarding, improves mental health, and strengthens the parent-child connection. We signpost parents to the latest news stories on sex and relationships topics they can use as ways in for starting sex ed conversations with their kids. Making news last month was the Police Scotland campaign, Don't Be That Guy, which encourages men to call out gender-based violence and challenge their attitudes. Its message is, most guys don't look in the mirror and see a problem, but it's staring us in the face. Sexual violence begins long before you think it does. Don't be that guy. Meanwhile, as White Ribbon UK explains, men's violence against women exists on a continuum. Sexist jokes, banter, catcalling, and harassment can end with rape and murder. Also hitting headlines in the past few years have been female-led initiatives from Me Too, Time's Up, and Everyday Sexism to recent impressive campaigns by young women. There's Our Streets Now, which combats public sexual harassment. There's the Teach Us Consent petition. There's Girls' Night In, mobilizing women to boycott bars and clubs after the needle spiking outbreak. There are the consent classes being piloted by Reclaim These Streets and Shout Out UK. And of course, there's the power of the testimonies, 54,000 now, which galvanized Ofsted into action to review sexual abuse in schools, and which made the words "everyone's invited" shorthand for confronting rape culture. Public awareness campaigns around smoking and drink driving change people's attitudes and behavior. It can happen, as Hemingway wrote, gradually, then suddenly. An article in Bazaar magazine put it well. We came up with hands, face, space. Surely we can create messaging on ending male violence. Yes, the personal is political, and knowledge is power, and sex education begins at home. Schools encouraging parental engagement in relationships and sex education, RSE, is vital. And parents talking openly with their children about difficult sex and relationship topics continues to play a crucial part in making violence against women and girls socially unacceptable.
Thank you very much. We were expecting one more speaker, so I'm just going to check. She's not in the gallery or somewhere, I can't see. It was Nimco Ali, the campaigner against violence against women and girls and female genital mutilation, was here to speak to us as well. Just double checking. Don't leave anyone out. No. Okay. Okay, so that concludes the external speakers. Thank you all very, very much. I'm now going to call on members of the council to contribute, and you'll each have 2 minutes to address the council. You can make comments or questions to particular external participants or to the cabinet members, but can I ask that if they are to a particular participant, you let them know. Tell them who you want to answer the question. I'll be taking them in rounds of 3, and then we'll go to the participants, then we'll come back, because I think that should make things easier. First up, Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. I do know how difficult it can be to even vocalise some of these issues. And thank you in particular to Leah from Outspoken Sex Education for acknowledging the role of pornography, the multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to promoting and normalising violence against women and girls. I note that the background paper for this debate didn't include the word pornography, and there was no reference made to the industry. I read the excellent Camden New Journal special edition from cover to cover. The word pornography was used once. That was in reference to its use by police officers as part of bullying female colleagues. Again and again, we find out that violent porn has been a factor in violent crimes against women. 35% of internet downloads are estimated to be porn. That's more than Amazon and pretty much anything else I can think of combined. And 90% of the most commonly viewed heterosexual pornography includes aggression and violence towards women. Pornography is not entertainment promoting sexual liberation, free choice and free expression. It's a global campaign for the promotion of male power over women, misogyny and inequality. We hear from our young men here in Camden, students at our Camden schools, so damaged by pornography that they can't achieve sexual satisfaction without simulating strangulation of their girlfriends during sex. And our girls, by the same token, are going to pornography to learn what's expected of them sexually. We have all been groomed, whether we know it or not, by exposure to pornography. But we don't even say it. We don't name it. So please, as part of what we're going to do about this, we need to talk about pornography. So can I ask the members of the panel if you agree that tackling porn culture is a key part of tackling violence against women and girls? And if so, can I ask this council to please acknowledge the role of the pornography industry in promoting and normalising violence against women? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eslam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Violence against women and girls should have no place in Camden, but thanks to the Camden New Journal, we now know that despite our commitment to wipe out abuse, we are still far from preventing it. Last week, I discovered that a male councillor had been impersonating a woman living in social housing on social media and using it to politically and publicly attack me and my family. The abuse I suffered at the hands of this councillor is nothing compared to what he went on to do to his wife, destroying her reputation in a vain bid to protect his own. I'd like to stress that my own experience of abuse by this councillor is nothing compared to the violence experienced by women and girls accessing our safety net services and those seeking refuge in the many shelters across the borough. But nevertheless, I'm a victim of gender-based abuse. I was smeared, harassed and abused by men in positions of power. Some of this abuse and breathing malicious stories against me to the press came when I was heavily pregnant in what I believed was a serious attempt to damage my health and that of my unborn baby. So when we sit here and nod or condemn, we should acknowledge that no place is immune. Gender-based violence and abuse is rampant across institutions, and Camden Council is not immune. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Porritt.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Madam
sorry.
Mayor.
A brief pause.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to say, obviously, that particular issue has gained a great deal of publicity locally, but as members will have seen, that the ex-member now involved in that has referred this matter to me as the monitoring officer. And I just want to make it clear, and I think members will accept this, that of course this is going to be subject to a process, and that process will be carried through with myself talking to an independent person, and it's subject to that. Now, normally I would never comment on anything like that, but of course this has gained a huge amount of publicity, and Councillor Essendus has made reference to it. So I thought I'd just confirm that that is a process this council has agreed, which we will now go through.
Thank you. Councillor Porritt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd just like to start by thanking all of the speakers tonight for what you said. I think you've shed light on an important range of issues. We know that this is going to be complex to tackle and address, and it has to be done from every angle possible through all of our institutions. And it's great that there's a number of individuals out there committed to doing that. I'd like to particularly turn my attention to Chief Superintendent Carter, and first of all welcome you to your new role as our Borough Commander. You're not coming into this position at an easy time. I know you're very experienced, but clearly trust in the Metropolitan Police is at an all-time low anyway, and there are a number of communities across London for whom that trust never really existed in the first place. And I think for women in particular, we know the reasons why it's very low at the moment because of all the incidents that we've been hearing about over recent months. And obviously what happened to Sarah Everard is at the forefront of a lot of women's minds. And I thank you for acknowledging actually that there are these issues of trust. So what I'd like to know from you is, here in our borough, what can we do to do things differently, to restore trust with women, with ethnic minority people who live in Camden as well, residents, because we know that that's a problem. And where I'd really like to see some leadership is in tackling the culture within the Metropolitan Police itself. Again, you referenced this, so thank you for that. But we know that misogyny exists across our society, and the Met is not immune from that. Indeed, there was a wider problem beyond what happened to Sarah Everard and the individual who murdered her, and that there were other officers that joked about that situation. So I'd really like to hear from you how you're going to, make Camden really play a leading role in tackling that culture.
Interesting. Thank you. Would any of the external participants like to respond to Councillor Wright on the issue of porn and its role in violence against women? Anyone in the room?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm happy to, and thank you, Anna, for raising it. You're absolutely right. Pornography has become normalised in young people's lives, exactly as you described. You're 100% right. One of our recommendations is probably written in code, but maybe we need to make it a bit more explicit. It talks about healthy relationships education at schools, because, as I said, great work goes on, as we heard from Parliament Hill. But, this is absolutely endemic in our schools. That's young people's perception of what a sex life is or what a relationship should be. And, we need to start really early on this. I think we've got some good stuff in our report, but I couldn't agree more with you that it's absolutely endemic, and it definitely, without a doubt, and I'm sure the Commander will speak about that, but it definitely leads, there's a continuum there, and it definitely does lead to sexual assault and abuse.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, Jennifer.
I wanted to thank you as well, Anna. The girls that we work with are from minoritised communities, and so we have an additional issue of how to address topics like this with them, because they're fairly isolated, and the fact that we get to work with them is very precious and special, and we have to be super careful with the topics we raise and be discreet, or we won't see them again. Work is being done with many of the communities resident in the borough, and I just want to say it's really hard.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I just want to say, parents these days generally have not been raised with parents who spoke openly with them, so it's very difficult to talk about sex and relationship issues, particularly pornography. However, the British Board of Film Classification has said that children are coming across it at younger ages, some as young as 7. Either they're shown it, they've looked for it, or they've found it. They come across it. But it's so important for parents to have the skills and the confidence and the tools to be able to just challenge themselves and try to talk openly to, as you say, normalize as well at home the fact that that you can talk openly, and then because statistics also show that children do want to be able to turn to their parents for talking about sex and relationship issues.
Thank you. Did any of the remote participants want to respond on that point? Just don't want to leave anyone out. No? Superintendent Carter, did you have a response to Councillor Porritt?
Yes, thanks very much for your question. So I think the points raised were around sort of internally and externally what we're going to do and what we are doing. So for starters, we've launched a new raising concerns policy which allows us internally, staff who are concerned about behaviour, things that they're witnessing, to report that, and so it can be dealt with confidentially. We've got a new dedicated chief officer whose role is solely around professionalism and standards. My input in the last few weeks since I've been here is around face-to-face briefings with my staff around expectations and setting those. As an organisation, we've adopted a number of requirements that come out of the College of Policing around vetting, and so staff entering the organisation. We've got, I think it's important around how we operate internally will have a large impact on how people see us externally. So in order for us to be truly representative of London, We've done a lot around recruitment, particularly from minority backgrounds, to make sure that as an organisation we are truly representative of the communities. We've got a big internal support network for female officers, and also we do a lot around developing our staff from minority backgrounds around that, as well as building on the kind of expectations piece. As I sort of highlighted in my first bit, I'm still very much in fact-finding phase in terms of where do I need to focus my efforts. So it's really important I hear from people like yourself as to which parts of the community in Camden I need to focus my efforts. Is it geographical? Is it particular demographics? And we will do that. I will follow that accordingly rather than, because I need to focus that on the right areas. So I'm really, really listening to where we need to do that, taking feedback and guidance so that we can learn and improve and get better.
Thank you. Next round of questions. Councillor Khatun.
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. As a member of the Camden Women's Forum, I was extremely delighted to do this work and making sure that we listen to all our victims who has been suffering and has sort of making sure that they get all the support. And Councillor Mason, as she mentioned, that any kind of recommendation that will take it forward and will make sure that it's implemented within the local authority. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, white, black, young, old, rich, poor, and the LGBT community can face that, and which means sometimes we are fear to share our experience and some of the casework that I receive. Residents come up to me and say, Samantha, I don't want to share this with the police. I don't want to report this because I feel fear of my communities, my husband, the society that I live with, and I don't want to become a single parent. My husband will leave me and carry on. I mean, and I feel like there wasn't enough support for some of the residents, and it's all been hidden. And so we need to find out how we tackled where some of the issues have not been recognized, and we need to work towards find out the domestic violence been hidden and how do we work and acknowledge that. And also I've noticed some of the signs, the early signs of domestic violence, but we don't notice this. So I wanted to know from the external speakers whether there is a support for or you have some sort of training to recognize the early signs of domestic violence and making sure that the victim get the support. And thanks to our borough commander for giving us the reassurance of making sure that the support is there for the victims. And obviously, as a BAME community, a member of the BAME community, I feel like we need to work towards supporting more of our BME communities and ensuring that they receive the support. And Hopscotch is working really well with the BAME community. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Jawira.
Thank you. I want to thank the speakers, councillors, officers, and other people that have contributed from the voluntary sector. Thank you very much for the enormous work that everybody has been doing. I want to say I'm going to take a different tack on this issue. Public sexual harassment is most common form of violence against women and girls, restricting their freedom of movement and expression. 2/3 of women face public street harassment in the UK. Street harassment is not covered by any specific offence, unlike in other countries such as Portugal, Belgium, and even France. Stopping street harassment will be a powerful step in tackling inequality and keeping women safe. There's an organization called Our Streets Now, and their petition has 200,000 signatures to date to make street harassment a specific crime. Only 14% of pupils have been taught about public sexual harassment at school, and that 47% of those will not report an incident of public sexual harassment. I'm really calling upon our council to promote the campaign to make street harassment a crime. This might go some way to help the police at least do the work that they need to do. And in fact, in reflection of the first deputation, it will actually empower the police to have a statute to arrest people for street harassing. I'm calling upon the Chief Executive to write to our MPs, Ms. Tulip Siddiq and Sir Keir Starmer, and the Mayor, Sabrina Francis, could you please, and the Police and Crime Commissioner, to ask them to show their support for this campaign by signing the petition and by lobbying ministers to make street harassment a specific crime. Ask our schools, academies, and colleges to each develop a clear policy of tackling harassment, separate to the bullying policy. Dispel the myth that violence to women happens to the poor only. I do not want us to continue to treat minorities as a victim of problems at all times. Women suffering from harassment is a classless, and there's evidence of passive aggression from some of their partners, even if they live in their mansions. So please, it's not just a problem of ethnic minorities or the poor people. It's our problem, all of us. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Hickson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, can I also extend my thanks to such a powerful set of speakers? Not long ago, we sat here and discussed the situation in Afghanistan, and at the time I said I couldn't sit silent and not talk about the plight of women and girls trapped in that country. And like many people, I felt powerless to help as stories of physical and structural violence occurred. But today we're talking about women and girls right here, and we're not powerless, and yet it's still happening. And it can happen to anyone, anywhere. One of the issues about gender-based violence is that it can hide in plain sight and grow from behaviour that is still socially tolerated and even normalised. But at least we're talking about it. We're having the difficult conversations. We're talking about porn in public, in full council. But the CNGJ got a lot right this week, because all through the stories and contributions was a call for action, not just words. We all agree that more needs to be done, but that is what we're in danger of. Strong words without action. The Women's Forum and the incredible people who spoke to it should absolutely be praised, but it started in November last year with the final session back in August. It should have published its final report and implementation should be underway. Quite simply, the women we heard from needed sustained action to start back when the forums did. The actions can't wait. So what can and should we do? Of the recommendations mentioned from the Women's Forum report, one is a review of housing policy and another is the creation of another board. This might be a step in the right direction, but neither are real tangible action which will directly help women and girls. However, some of the recommendations sound practical, and I look forward to supporting them, only I hope now going at a much faster speed. Tonight we've heard about the personal experience from a deputy talking about an experience in West Hampstead, with some very practical asks for better lighting and other measures, asking for real reassurance that the police and Camden are taking action. We heard that audits are taking place and that action would follow. But that event was a year ago, so why hasn't action happened? We need to move much more quickly. So for my contribution to this debate, I want to give my wholehearted support to action in the council, but also out there practically helping in our communities. And can we agree today that the risk of violence against women and girls should be both a fundamental and explicit consideration in all our relevant council decisions, from housing to planning to education to public awareness campaigns?
Thank you. I'll now go back to the speakers. Councillor Katoon had a question about domestic violence in different communities and what the early signs are that we could look out for. So if anyone wanted to come back on that. Yes, ready.
Thank you, Samantha. I think that you raised a very important point. From our experience in Hopscotch, I can tell you that there is a great appetite amongst the black and minoritized women that we support for awareness building sessions. We could run them all day, every day, and they would run full. And I think one of the reasons is there's very little language around mental health and abuse in some community. There's very little vocabulary in some community languages. So with more funding, more of this work can be carried out, not only in Hopscotch, in other locality, VCS throughout the borough, and that would be a start, just getting women talking to women about the things that matter to them in a safe and trauma-informed way. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you. And, oh, come back as well.
Hi, I just wanted to say that we at Solace, within the refuges, do an Arise 8-week programme. So that's educating the women who come within our refuges about the different types of abuse, what to look out for, the signs that perpetrators might use when they are abusing women, and it's not just physical, and what to look out for, you know, when they go into future relationships outside of the refuge. But also Solace also educate professionals as well through our IRIS services, where they go to GP surgeries and provide education around domestic abuse as well. And I just wanted to also say that Sister Space provide training for professionals around domestic abuse and the Black community specifically.
Thank you. Any more on that one? No. Councillor Jarira had a kind of question and comment around the campaign on sort of sexual harassment and how that is part of violence against women. So if any of our external speakers wanted to come back on that.
From the many referrals that we get within refuges, a lot of women have experienced sexual harassment, and that includes perpetrators using that as a power and control mechanism, and constantly calling them, texting them, even when they change their numbers. Somehow they've managed to find the woman again. We've had this recently where a perpetrator has found a woman, even despite her changing her number, her online social media and Google accounts, and it's still happening despite all of these changes. So I definitely think something needs to be put in place to change that.
Thank you. Councillor Higson, was your question more for the Cabinet member? Yeah. You can answer now, or do you want to save it for the sum up?
Well, I mean, we always want to go faster and do more, and I did refer to the Cabinet report that I brought in March, which resulted in the major change in housing policy. And this absolutely matters, because what's been happening in Camden is that women who experience domestic abuse, they are the ones that have been losing their homes. They are the ones that are pushed out with their kids and having often to live in very poor temporary accommodation and in refuges, which I'm sure you would agree, you know, aren't always all that pleasant, but necessary as they are. So I think we have been going, you know, we have been pushing it. My experience is that actually it's taken it has taken time for all our officers in all the different directorates to really begin to see this as a problem that relates to them, that they can do something about. But earlier, I think somebody, perhaps Helen, particularly thanked some of our senior officers, and I would like to thank John Roney, our Director of Finance. Now, you don't find many directors of finance leading the fight against violence against women, but he's done a fantastic job, along with Joe Brown, in supporting the Women's Forum and really increasing consciousness. Now, I understand that our senior officers are about to go for an away day altogether, which is quite unusual, to talk about this issue so that we can have a coordinated and proper response to the very serious challenges that violence against women poses.
Thank you. Councillor Shard, did you indicate you wanted to come back on this as well?
I read an article today in the Times, and I thought that it was a bit of good news. So after much lobbying by the Labour Party and the public outcry, that Tory government ministers are finally acknowledged the epidemic of violence against women and girls, and that it needs to be made one of the most urgent national crime-fighting priorities. I mean, I think it's about time, but what does this really mean? There have been various promises made since the Sarah Everard murder, but we haven't seen anything change until today, that report that came out in the Times. So I sincerely hope that action is taken, as the trust between women and the government's inaction on the subject of violence against women and girls has been broken, and it's going to take immediate action by the government and not words to fix that. So, as Angela's pointed out, some of that work has been developing and we've been working, but what has the government done immediately when all of this stuff was going on. So I had to add that because I read that today in the Times and it did bring me hope, but actually I felt a bit hopeless after it because nothing's been done.
Thank you. Third round of questions now because we have still got time. Councillor Madlani.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and again, just echo the thanks to the speakers and also the speakers at the vigil before, because I really found it a really moving experience. As one of my 23 of my 30 cousins are women, I've always had to be a strong supporter of Asian women because otherwise I get beaten up, and sorry, I shouldn't check that. But it's a really powerful. I'm inspired by amazing women in my life every day. A couple of speakers talked about the experience, and it was Transgender Day of Remembrance on Saturday, and obviously we unveiled our transgender crossing on Tavistock Place. I'd love to hear from Helene and from the Borough Commander about the specific work that both your bodies are doing on transgender, to support the transgender community, who face much worse incidents of domestic violence than others. And I'd also like to ask Solace and Hopscotch, just to ask us, you've got this opportunity here today, what more can we do, and particularly to the men in the room? We haven't got any more funding, unfortunately, because of our years of austerity, but is there more we can all do individually? And to the lady who spoke around at the end, was it Leah, on the outspoken sex education, what more can we do here? Give us some actions to take away that aren't just money.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
Domestic abuse is often thought of as physical violence, but it can often include coercive control, emotional abuse and intimidation, as you know, as well as isolation. Research suggests that women experiencing domestic abuse are more likely to experience a mental health problem, while women with mental health problems are statistically more likely to experience domestic abuse, with 30 to 60% of women with a mental health problem having experienced domestic violence. As we've heard from both Angela and Helen and a few others, Camden Safety Net have an independent domestic and sexual violence advocate co-located in 2 hospitals, the Royal Free and University College. They are currently working from home, delivering the services virtually. They continue to risk assess patient referrals and also deliver training to frontline health staff, helping them to identify risk and making safe referrals to Camden Safety Net. They also have an advocate co-located in various mental health sites where they are able to deliver face-to-face advocacy and support mental health staff to work with disclosure of domestic abuse from both the survivors and, as Angela's mentioned, the perpetrators. Camden Health Watch worked with 15 survivors who have shared their experiences, and they have produced a report called Surviving Domestic Abuse, which is going to our Health and Wellbeing Board in December. The report cuts across all of the guiding principles in the Health and Wellbeing Strategy, and in particular resonates with the strategy's population health approach, which seeks to improve physical and mental health, promote well-being and reduce health inequalities across an entire population. Some of the key messages were, not all abusive relationships involve physical violence. Many suffer from emotional, as I've said, which is no less destructive. It's often minimised or overlooked. Many interviewees felt that society valued physical abuse as more dangerous than emotional abuse, even though they felt the opposite was true. And while one woman gets abused or harmed in Camden, it's one woman too many. And together in Camden, with partners, we will work to end it and provide a safety net. Thank you to Councillor Mason. You're doing a brilliant job, and Councillor Shah.
Thank you. Councillor Spinella.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I add my thanks to the speakers today of this incredible topic, one that I think never ceases to amaze me of just how much still to this day goes unspoken, how much can be, well, especially perhaps by people of my gender, especially ignored, culpably at times, hopefully not maliciously, but nevertheless, it is a sad indictment that there's still so many revelations that can come from these speakers and from these kinds of debates. My questions are, however, towards the Cabinet members. I noted that Councillor Shaw, I welcome that Councillor Shaw and Councillor Harrison, think it was, sent a letter to the mayor about the opening of the 24/7 for the Victoria and Central lines. However, I think the residents of Camden would be a lot more interested to know of the future of the 24/7 for the Northern lines and the Jubilee lines, both of which impact a much larger part of the borough. And to that effect, I would be interested to know what steps have been taken by them. I also have a different question on a different topic. Following on the points that Councillor Katoon made a few minutes ago, I would be interested to know from the relevant cabinet member, it could be Councillor Mason, it could be actually the leader of the council itself, how are we progressing in terms of council officers being trained and recognising domestic abuse evidence when they're dealing with Camden residents, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to the participants again, probably for the last time. So Councillor Badlani had a question on trans issues and how you deal with them in your charities and organisations, and what actions we could take, preferably actions that don't cost lots of money.
I think a councillor's trying to come in. Am I okay to speak?
Sorry.
I wasn't speaking.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, you are. There's a lot on the list, but we still have the rest of the agenda. But yeah, you can.
Yeah, just to your point around transgender, our report recognises the experience of trans women and the terrible abuse that they face. It's all our recommendations are trans inclusive. I'm sorry that I didn't say that. It was just like normal to us that that's the approach we should take. So I'm sorry if I didn't pull that out specifically, but there's absolutely no reason. I would say that we're really lucky that we've got Tessa Havers. I've forgotten the other bit of her name now. I should talk because I'm double-barreled myself. But we've also got her as a member. But before I finish, I'd like to say something that I pointed out when I spoke, that this is a universal theme, and this should cross political divides and not do political point scoring. And I just think that that's really important that we stress that, because we will not move forward if we're point scoring with each other. Councillor Higson has been a member of the forum, I'm really pleased to say. You came along, didn't you, to our first report, yeah, and you've really supported it. So I'd like to say, to note that, but I think it's a really important point that we work in the grain of that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
To answer your question about what you can do as a man, every day commit to one act which is anti-misogynistic. One act. It could be calling out an appalling behaviour towards a woman. It could be speaking to a young male person positively about women. It could be listening and acknowledging without excuse to a woman who might be trying to share. Just one act. Make sure by the time your head hits the pillow, you have committed that one act. But I am deeply disappointed to hear that we shouldn't be asking for funding. How is there going to be change when the organisations that are reaching the women that you as a council, you as a borough cannot reach? If you cannot fund those organisations, how is the change going to come about? You have to figure out a way to make that happen.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, just on the point of transgender, we had a woman in our refuges not long ago who, quite honestly, throughout her whole time that she was in our refuges, which ended up being for a year, felt uncomfortable about being found out from the other women that she was transgender. She was always treading on eggshells, and I think the answer here is trying to find a way that transgender women aren't going to feel like that. And if that means that we need to find more self-contained refuges for them to feel safe, then that's something that needs to happen. It can't be a case where we're excluding transgender women from getting into refuge spaces when they might be extremely high risk, just because they can't share with other women, or other women might be judging them in those spaces.
Thank you very much. Councillor Callaghan had a question about kind of mental health and sexual... Oh, sorry.
I wanted to address the issue of what to do as a man. If you have children, or you could try speaking to the children and young people in your life, but if you're a parent and your father, for example, it's so wonderful to show vulnerability to both children, both kinds of children, if you have sons or daughters, and to be able to speak openly with them about sex and relationship issues. And generally, it falls to the mother in a family to speak about these things. However, it's wonderful that if men can open up and talk about these things to their daughters and to their sons, about things like pornography or how they felt growing up or going through puberty and that sort of thing, and show that vulnerability. And because sex and relationships is something that's so important to all of us our whole lives long.
Thank you.
Sorry, just briefly the point about transgender. So targeting someone because of their sexuality, their gender, is hate crime, and we take very positive action around that, very decisive. If we necessary, we'll arrest them. Now, we know it's traditionally very, very underreported, so I think understanding this in much more detail, we would encourage people to report it so we can get a better understanding of it locally, really. But we do take positive action.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan's question was about abuse not necessarily being physical and how we can help women with mental health issues. So if anyone would like to come back on that one. Particular? Yeah. It's fine if you don't. Did you have some? No? That's fine. And then kind of finally, Councillor Spinella had a question for the Cabinet members about the night tube and also mentioned training of staff. Yep. Do you want to come back on the training of staff very quickly?
I can just say we're starting mandatory training for all staff around domestic violence and looking at designing particular training around domestic violence screening for frontline officers. So how would you recognise early signs? And obviously that will be with our partner organisations. So that will be for all staff, housing, caretakers, people who will be out and about on other work so that they can spot the early signs.
And Councillor Shah, if you wanted to respond on the question about your letter to the Mayor of London.
Yeah, it's a joint letter from myself and Councillor Harrison. So yes, the letter states that we do appreciate the return of the Central and Victoria lines on the 27th of November. But what we wrote in our letter was that whilst the Central and Victoria lines provide service in the south of the borough, we hope to see a full instatement of the night tube, in particular to the Northern Piccadilly and Jubilee lines. That was just a bit of clarification on your point. I think Councillor Harrison wants to...
Sorry, did you want to clarify, Councillor Harrison? Yeah, go on.
No, I mean, Councillor Shah spelled it all out. I think it's important to say a word about funding, actually. We've heard a lot from the speakers tonight about the importance of funding at a local level. And, you know, while I'm glad we wrote to TfL about that important issue, London is facing dire straits. I'm aware that the government has only just started to talk to TfL about a funding deal which runs out in less than 2 weeks. The last time a deal was agreed, it was at 14 minutes to midnight. This comes with real risks. There were consultations now open about bus services being cut, some routes entirely removed within the borough. There's issues around the impact on road safety, on supporting the economy, but it's when you see these sorts of decisions being taken or not taken that you understand how it can have a real impact on some of the most vulnerable people, including women just trying to get home at night. And we really need to do better on this as a city.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and I'm sorry to everyone who's going to miss out on coming in on the debate, but Councillor Berry.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, just to add my thanks to every single one of the speakers and also all the women in the room who I know it would have been so hard to steel yourself for this meeting to come along to it. I think it's a fair bet that just about every single one of us will have had some of our worst memories dredged up by having to talk about this, but it's really important that we do. I said in the CNJ this week that I hear far too many speeches and statements from politicians saying things like we must protect our women as if we are politicians' possessions or pets who must be shut away. And I'm really glad we've heard none of this today. Instead, we've heard about the root causes, placing the onus on men to carry out prevention amongst their peers. That's really important. About the intersection of race and class with gender, and about building a listening culture and better education that changes attitudes at the start of people's lives and careers. We've heard about changing the social environment, and the motion and the Women's Forum recommendations we'll look at later, they're full of practical measures to make sure that women get action, get listened to and believed when they're reporting incidents and crimes against them. I think it's really important that we do vote for the motion later on. I may not get a chance to speak on that, so I just wanted to say that at this time. I also want the highest ambition on this problem. I think if we want to really prevent crimes and measure ourselves against a target, it has to be for zero murders, zero deaths of women at the hands of men. And I think we also need to see change inside the police as well, which I also talked about in my article. I compare Camden with Iceland. Iceland has a similar population. It has effectively zero murders in an average year, and we have to be asking, why isn't that possible in Camden? And one thing I know for certain was key in Iceland was a big change in police recruitment and training 10 years ago. It changed the culture not only in how policing was done, but who was doing those jobs. So I hope our new borough commander was deadly serious when he said he will be rooting out those who display unacceptable behaviour, and when he said he would be changing the gender representation in his command. And I hope we will see the removal of personnel from the force that this implies in future months. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cotton, final question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can remember my late mother, who was a volunteer at the Women's Refuge. I remember overhearing a conversation she was having with my sister about how she had been herself a victim of sexual harassment on the tube, and I remember that really upset me at that time, and it upsets me even more today to know that almost every woman I've known has been a victim of sexual harassment at the very least, and often worse. And Councillor Mason said that this problem of violence against women and girls is increasing. And so we have to ask ourselves why. And of course, it's about male behaviour, and there are things men can do. One of the little things I do is if I'm in the street at night and there's a woman in the street, I cross the road or turn the corner so that she doesn't feel in any way threatened by me. And there are other things, as somebody's alluded to, if you're a father, which I'm not, but if you're a brother or an uncle, which I am, then you can set the right example to the to young boys growing up. But as Councillor Mason said, this problem is increasing. So why? And I think that Councillor Wright, and I really have to totally endorse what she said, put her finger on it. Boys as young as 6 are exposed to pornography on the internet, which objectifies and degrades women and girls. And we're now living in an environment where prostitution, which also degrades and objectifies women and girls, and which is closely linked to human trafficking and modern-day slavery, is being reframed as sex work, as though it was a job like any other. It isn't, and we shouldn't stand for it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Berry asked in particular about police changes, so it feels like it was a question for you.
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
Councillor Berry asked about, or used the Icelandic example of a changing police force and how that can make things better, so if you have any ideas on that.
Yeah, so I did refer to culture change and recognising what a huge amount there is to do. The last few weeks have been like no other time in my personal career and for many other colleagues around what we've experienced. But I know that there is absolute steadfast commitment from the top of the organisation and locally here around what we will not tolerate in terms of behaviour and standards. And I'm determined to make sure that everyone who works here and serves the residents of Camden is absolutely clear what's expected of them. And that's through relentless messaging and just a commitment to investigate any wrongdoing. Anything that is unacceptable will be dealt with robustly and ensuring that only the highest standards are maintained.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Cotton touched on a lot of points, but talked about sexual harassment, porn and sex work. So if any of our contributors wanted to respond to his points, we can take it then that we'll move back to the Cabinet members to sum up what we've heard this evening. Councillors Mason and Shah, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you everybody, speakers, questioners, everybody who's contributed. I think it was a serious and important discussion, and it's not really the easiest circumstances to have that discussion at a council meeting like this, but I think it was extremely valuable. I'll make a couple of points. Can I begin with men? I think the need for men to talk publicly about misogyny and to call out violence against women and girls is absolutely essential, and I'm enormously grateful for all the men who've spoken this evening. And during our White Ribbon campaign, I hope more and more men will speak out. And it's not actually in our Women's Forum recommendations, but I'm tempted to try and put one in, if I can, about really sort of having sponsored male talk-ins or speak-outs or whatever we want to call them. I think that's what we absolutely need. And people will laugh and say it's silly, but it is absolutely essential. Secondly, I want to say, again, a point about open discussion and the need to talk about sexual relationships, identity, sexual confidence and well-being. I mean, obviously that, as Councillor Wright has put very powerfully, that is at the heart of the change that we have to see. And I very much hope that the speaker from Parliament Hill, who spoke about the work that's beginning to happen in our schools, where these discussions are happening amongst boys and girls, I think that's absolutely vital. And it's picked up in the education strategy. And I want to, that is what has got to happen if things are going to change. And I myself would absolutely condemn sex work as not being liberating or offering freedom of choice for women. Thirdly, the point Benaifa made about awareness. I think that is fantastically important. And again, I hope that our work on White Ribbon Day will really increase awareness, and we need to create a Camden conversation amongst all our residents, all our communities, all our services about awareness of violence against women and girls and how to detect it. Fourthly, though, I want to make one point about gender equality, which I don't think we did discuss quite enough, because I firmly believe that while women are unequal, we will not solve the problems of violence against women and girls. So gender equality and the long, long fight for gender equality also has to be at the heart of what we're trying to do. And finally, can I mention the F word? By that I mean funding, resources. It's absolutely clear that we're not going to be able to do the things we want to do. And I think particularly of the work that lies before the borough commander that he's spoken about today with great sincerity and determination. But that is going to require resources. We require resources to do the work we need to do as a council. The voluntary sector, as Benaifa has said most eloquently, absolutely needs resources. So if the government is serious about really doing something about these issues, they must back changes with proper funding and proper resources. But anyway, I think it's been a great debate, and thank you all very much. It has, I think, advanced the whole cause this evening. Thank you.
I just wanted to end with talking about some really practical steps that we're working on in Camden at the moment in terms of women's safety in the public realm. So we are working with the police, and we're developing the use of the Street Safe Reporting app in order to add an option for women to update us on areas where they do not feel safe, so that we can work with our partners to deliver improvements in the public realm. As part of the Met Police Growth Strategy, Camden will benefit from an increased number of police officers. We've got new town centre teams which will be established in Camden Town and Euston, each containing 25 police officers. And this will also be an increase in there will also be an increase in the number of dedicated ward officers operating in local neighbourhoods across the borough. We will be working with our Met Police partners to ensure that the increased police resources work alongside council services to prioritise women's safety, and we have, with other stakeholders on the Community Safety Partnership Board, agreed that violence against women and girls is one of our priorities. Camden have effectively lobbied with MOPAC and other organisations to highlight the importance of prioritising and responding to the concerns raised by women directly, and the increase will provide scope for an increased police presence within the Camden evening and nighttime economy to provide reassurance and to proactively identify and respond to offending behaviour. We do seek to support and encourage our Met partners to take further measures to improve the gender balance within the Borough Command Unit. We have 1,300, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, 1,360 police officers assigned to our Borough Command Unit, of which 453 are female. That is a big improvement, but we would like to see more. We know that violence against women and girls is hugely underreported, making the true prevalence of it very difficult, and we will work with our police partners to make reporting easier by looking at the barriers more deeply, and our Borough Commander Andy Carter has committed to this. We're also taking steps to sign up to the London Women's Night Safety Charter, with a very strong commitment to work in partnership with licensed venues and business organisations to improve the safety of women within the Camden evening and nighttime economy. We've recently also taken steps to amend the Council Statement of Licensing Policy to ensure that women's safety features as a key priority, and our approach will focus on encouraging new and existing pubs, clubs and late-night venues across the borough to establish a zero-tolerance-based approach towards sexual offending and misogynistic behaviour. Lastly, we commit to prioritising violence against women and girls as a council, and we commit to taking a feminist approach to tackling this, from street harassment to domestic violence and abuse, with a coordinated approach, and we will continue to campaign for misogyny to be recognised as a hate crime nationally.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes the debate for this evening. Can I thank the external speakers who made the effort to attend for their valuable contribution to this important debate. I'd also like to personally thank them for their hard work on this vital issue in our borough, because I know it can't be very easy. And I'd also like to thank all of the councillors who contributed to the debate, particularly the women, quite frankly, because the emotional labour involved in thinking about and rehashing terrible things should never be underestimated. So thank you all for your contributions. So let's hope that it all leads to change and we can work together and make Camden a safer place for women and girls. So the Cabinet members will bring a short report back to the next ordinary meeting and they'll follow up on this debate. Thank you, everyone. So item 8, which we're now moving on to, is the statement by the leader. Councillor Gould, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, everyone, for what I think was a difficult but crucial and powerful debate, and I think it's so important that we have these discussions in full council, and powerful to do so. I wanted to start off with remembrance. We had just over a week ago Remembrance Sunday, and I think it was powerful to be back on Euston Road and to have that moment of silence where we remembered everyone who has lost their lives in warfare, and I think important to mark that and remember that again today in full council. And I also wanted to remember someone closer to us, to home in Camden. One of our Camden officers, Sally Joseph, died unexpectedly from illness just over 2 weeks ago. She'd been in Camden since the 1980s, and dedicated her life to public service here, and she was head of services for looked after children. And probably everyone here didn't know her personally, but you would have known her in the work that she did, the way that our children thrive, the fight that went into getting them the best possible opportunities, the work we heard recently around disproportionality and being a good corporate parent to black young people. That so much of that was about her passion and her commitment, and losing her is losing a big part of Camden's heart. So I wanted to remember her here and say how much that we will miss her as a council. And I also wanted to take some time in my statement to remember those who lost their lives or have lost their lives to violence, as we have in this debate today. And reading those 19 names earlier was heartbreaking, and the statistics that we say but are hard to really imagine, that 2 women in the UK each week are killed by a partner or former partner. These are terrible statistics, and as Angela said earlier, it is an epidemic. We saw a community grieving in Primrose Hill when we went to a vigil for Nicole Hurley, who was a wonderful mum and neighbour, and has been ripped out of her community. But also we saw the way that they have come together, and you know, as we've heard today, it's everything we've been doing thus far isn't enough, because this is still happening, and we have fought really hard to protect funding for domestic abuse, as Angela said, despite austerity, and we will continue to do so. But it does require a community and council effort, which is why I think it has been powerful to have that cross-party support today and to all stand together around this issue. But I am really pleased that we, despite the cuts we're under, have found £400,000 to invest into the recommendations of the Women's Forum that we heard today, whether that's support for children who've been impacted, legal support for women. I think it's crucial that we not just hear this report, but actually ensure that it happens. So we will make that investment, and I'd like to end by thanking everyone who's shared their own testimony, because it's, as the Mayor said, it's not easy, but it's by raising these voices that we will lead to real change.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, do you wish to make a comment in response? You have 3 minutes as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I completely agree with the remarks of Councillor Gould regarding Remembrance Sunday. It's obviously the most powerful moment in, I think, our calendars, when she and I stand next to each other at the memorial at Euston and signify that whatever divides us in other times, whatever disputes one might have, the power of service, of sacrifice, of selflessness, of not for oneself but for all, shines through, which also shone through, and I want to attach myself to the comments that she made about Sally Joseph and everybody else that has passed away over the last most difficult 18 months that any of us have faced. And obviously all our council share our sympathies with Nicole Hurley and the other 18 victims that were listed. I was going to speak about another matter, but I think Angela made a very powerful point about the need for us to speak up. I didn't speak up in that debate because I didn't want to drown out a female voice, a woman. And I think that it is wrong to see violence against women and girls as a women's issue or just a women's issue. We have to see it as an issue for all of us. But that doesn't mean that the roles that we play in that fight are the same. Our role is, as men, to listen, to hear, to heed, to learn, and then, as Councillor Higson said, to act, to make sure we drive through and drive out that behaviour that has characterised our half of the species for the last several thousand years. Because the misogynistic violence we've seen is not a new invention. It has sadly been inherent to our existence as a species, and is something that we owe ourselves to drive out, and we don't have thousands more years to do it. We don't have decades. We need to do it right now. So I appreciate the debate that we had. On the issue of the police, I do want to remark and point out I don't believe that the police, the Met, should be disbanded, as we heard from one of the backbench councillors. But I do think that cultural change needs to be driven through, and urgently so. I think the judgment that was shown by the Met Commissioner, and I know this is outside the control of our council, but it is worth pointing out that because the poor judgment shown by the Commissioner, it's really important for us to recognise how much more work we have to do as a council in response to violence against women and girls. I don't have confidence in Cressida Dick to deliver on that, but clearly the Mayor of London does, and so we need to work with that and deliver on that. I think the buck does stop at the top, however. And I do want to thank everyone that spoke about their experience earlier, including Councillor Eslam-Doost. And I think that that lesson of the buck stopping at the top also applies in the experience that she had. I think whatever the outcome, and we've seen a punctuation point at the end of that episode this morning, I think we need to reflect on the poor judgment and the systemic oppression of women and the belief that they are there to take the fall for men, to bear the brunts of slingshots from men. I think that needs to stop here as well. And I have to say that the council's leadership showed very poor judgment in not accepting what was obvious from the very beginning. Believing that former councillor's story was not acceptable, because it took me 2 minutes of reading those tweets to realise that it was that former councillor's own words. And allowing him for 2 weeks to squirm and to pretend that abuse was not his, and to pretend that his wife was responsible, was not acceptable. And I think we need to show better judgment in future that was lacking. So I'm delighted that we have cross-party support like we had on Remembrance Sunday. And I hope that we can work together in driving out that culture of misogyny that's existed with us for so long, but hopefully not for much longer.
Thank you. Councillor Porritt, do you wish to make a statement?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to start by echoing the remarks about Remembrance Sunday. I think it was powerful for us all to be there and stand together, cross-party, in fact, and remember those who came before us and made huge sacrifices in order that we can enjoy the freedoms we do today. And also to echo the remarks about Sally Joseph, incredibly sad what has happened, and I'm sure all of our thoughts are with her friends and family and any other loved ones. Speaking of remembrance, it was also recently Trans Day of Remembrance, and I think this is an important moment, having had the debate that we just did, to recall that trans women are often among the most persecuted and marginalised of all female victims of violence. In fact, transgender people are 4 times more likely than those who are cisgender to experience violence. And we heard about some of the things that need to be done to address that, and the provisions that need to be put in place to ensure that they are safer in our society. And that flows from attitudes, just like everything we heard about today. I want to start by speaking about the debate, thanking the Leader of the Council for taking up my suggestion of rolling with this issue in this meeting. I think it was critical, the timing of it, and to have the Borough Commander come and speak to us at a time when his job really is going to be challenging. He's got his work cut out. Councillor Cooper has referred to some of the reasons why already. I've long expressed my lack of confidence in the Commissioner, and of course he's only in a position of leadership here in Camden, Islington, but I think we can lead the way and do things differently. That's our opportunity, and we must seize it. But when more than 750 Met employees have faced sexual misconduct allegations themselves across London, there's a lot of work to be done to root out the attitudes. So I do worry when I hear talk about resources and having more police patrols, because actually that's not at the heart of the problem. It's much more complex than that, and there'll be a lot of women at the moment who don't feel like seeing more police on the streets, frankly, makes them any safer. So more recognition of that, please. I'd just like to finally say that I'm glad that the night tube has been talked about this evening, and I'm assuming from the comments that therefore there will be cross-party support for our motion calling on the Mayor to reopen all of the tube lines, because this is at the heart of women's safety as well, having options available to get home safely and reduce that journey. But I also just want to recognise Lorna Greenwood's comments earlier in her deputation, that it's not just the public transport we take, it's our whole journey home, and we're not safe at any part of it, potentially. and I was quite concerned to hear that she was told by officers to get the bus. Clearly there's a lot of work to do at every level, and I hope that we will be tackling this head on here in Camden.
Thank you. Councillor Berry, do you wish to make a statement? You have 3 minutes.
I'm delighted, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much. I'm really glad I got to speak in the debate earlier, because now I am mainly going to talk about wider politics, because as a new political group on this council, I do think I owe the council a statement of our intentions. Though through an unconventional route, I'm very, very pleased to find myself now the leader of a group of 2 Greens on this council. I'm very grateful to Councillor Russell for joining me and to the rest of the council for recognising our new status. Though it was unconventional, this change does now mean that together we have more opportunities to represent green values here in the council. And throughout this term of office, I've always been very conscious that my job, as less than 2% of the people in this chamber, was still to represent the 13% of people who voted Green, along with the values and policies they supported at the last election. I've always been very pleased when the council has listened and adopted our ideas, particularly the move to 100% council tax relief for those residents least able to pay. And I have to say that in my time here, I have never doubted that this council puts the best interests of residents at the heart of its work, particularly in emergencies. I saw this in the Chalcots evacuation and again during the height of the pandemic. The changing and tumultuous events around coronavirus meant bringing to the fore the benefits of transparency and listening to members from the opposition, our ideas and our warnings in a genuine way. I was very grateful for being included in the oversight panel that facilitated that work. But like any holders of power over long periods of time, there is a risk of institutional inertia and defensiveness setting in some areas, and I do see that from this council too. Most obviously in the persistence of the top-down model of development used for the community investment programme, in also the reluctance to really examine its costs and benefits and how new models might be better, more led by the community. Now, I know this is like the most thorny issue for you, but it isn't a party political attack. I warned about aspects of institutional defensiveness in the interviews I gave after leaving the leadership of my own party. And it has a relevance too to policing, where the Daniel Morgan inquiry report warned about extreme institutional defensiveness being a kind of corruption. And I think even Labour's own internal scrutineers are tired of seeing such a resistance to challenge about the SIP. Those inside the administration will know better than me where else in your work these kinds of risks have been developing during this council's tenure. But I hope we can all do more now from the opposition and in future to help avoid these risks too. And then finally, following up on the debate earlier, we had Ask Her to Stand Day at the weekend, and it is excellent to see so many women's voices in the foreground of today's meeting. And so I hope more women who both want to change our misogynistic culture and improve our politics and our public services will be standing in next year's election alongside many of us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, you can make some remarks in response. You have 3 minutes.
I want to start just by thanking Oliver for his comments of solidarity. I think that as a female leader, I know how common death threats and misogynistic hate speech is for women in positions of power, and I know that colleagues around the country receive similar hate speech, and it puts people off putting themselves forward for office, as you set out, Sian. I think to go to Councillor Eswanadou's point about the unacceptable abuse that you received, it was completely unacceptable. I agree, and it is right that Lazaro has resigned his position and taken responsibility, and will continue to take action and hold ourselves to high standards on this and other issues. And I hope that you will encourage your party to do the same locally and nationally. To Sian's points, I think we'll always welcome some of those points, and I think that we always open ourselves up to challenge. I think, as you set out, even before you were a group, we always made sure that you were a key part of the scrutiny of the council. and we'll continue to work with you in that spirit, whatever issues you want to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you. There will now be 15 minutes for questions to the Leader and Cabinet members. I'll select questioners from the list of names who've already indicated that they have a question. Each councillor selected will have up to 1 minute to ask their question, though I do ask that you keep the questions brief so we can fit in as many as possible. The Leader or Cabinet member will have 2 minutes to reply to each question, and members are reminded that their question must be on the topic that they indicated it will be, or I'll rule it out of order and move on. First up, Councillor Parkinson to Councillor Beales.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Camden won a grant to scope works to regenerate Kilburn High Road from the GLA High Streets for All Fund. This was won thanks to a bid from Life in Kilburn, which Councillor Beales name-checked as having submitted the bid in a press release in August. However, over the months since, Life in Kilburn has not been meaningfully engaged at all. On the 21st of October, Life in Kilburn wrote a blog post saying, "We think that the project has been badly managed and does not have the interests of Kilburn as its motivation." At Culture and Environment Committee earlier this month, Councillor Beales said that we need to engage a broad section of the community now and that can't wait. Camden Conservatives agree with that fully and back a Stage 2 bid being made. But the only reason Life in Kilburn withheld its support for a Stage 2 application was because it was not engaged. So why claim to engage a broad section of the community when Camden isn't even engaging the group, or perhaps one of two groups, whose bid won the grant in the first place? Is Camden prioritising press releases over engaging the community?
Councillor Beales.
Thank you very much. I need to sit down, don't I? Force of habit. Thank you very much, Councillor Parkinson, for your question. It's quite similar to Councillor Cooper's question, and I think the response about 2 weeks later remains the same. We received a number of bids. I think the most bids in London, which was fantastic for the High Streets Fund. 2 of which were from Kilburn, 1 of which was from Life in Kilburn. We've been very open to supporting community market to go forward. We're very open to remunerating the individual from Life in Kilburn for their time in that project. We've been quite clear that we believe the council has not really a duty to hit the funding deadline that's come up in the last couple of weeks. We don't believe it was right to let that opportunity pass us by as a borough for additional funding. We're very happy to look at future opportunities with Life in Kilburn to take forward that project. The offer still remains to continue. A number of meetings have taken place with Life in Kilburn over the course of the project and Stage 1. We have an open offer to continue to meet that individual organisation should they wish, and really have an open door to continue to work with them. Very pleasingly, we have submitted a Stage 2 bid with other parties involved, and we hope to get additional funding for Kilburn, which I very much hope you can support.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, that actually ties into my supplementary question, which is about the Levelling Up Fund. And in response to questions about why Camden didn't bid for the fund within Hampstead and Kilburn, it was said that there's no suitable projects, which is basically saying that the precarious high streets in Kilburn and Cricklewood aren't suitable. The same applies for Finchley Road, Swiss Cottage, and also the village centres which rely on tourism in Hampstead, West Hampstead and Belsize. I think the High Street for All Fund was cited as a reason why Kilburn was already being catered for. But as I just said, that's a project that the community group that won the bid says isn't in Kilburn's best interests. So my question is, as supplementary, before reaching the conclusion that there are no appropriate sites in the Hampstead and Kilburn part of Camden, what engagement did Camden have with the community, and did it discuss it with Life in Kilburn?
Thank you very much. I think it's very frustrating, to be honest, to have the opposition continually blame this council for their government divesting from this borough. They don't give us money. They've taken away more than half of our funding, expect us to beg for scraps around the table to invest in our communities. And when they actually don't give London a significant amount of funding, it's then our fault, apparently, for not doing enough to convince them. We've all seen with the politicisation of government funding how they've distributed the vast majority of funding, guess where, to recently won Conservative seats. I wonder why. It must be purely because of the quality of the bids. We've seen government ministers have... Perhaps we didn't donate enough money to certain people and be around the table for key decision makers. This council is committed to getting a significant amount of funding. We've won the High Streets Fund, one of the highest funding receipts from the Mayor of London's Council House Building Fund, almost 90 million. And we've just won about 1.4 million for Somerstown for Future Neighbours bid. The idea that we're not bidding for funding is completely ridiculous. I'm very happy to meet government ministers any time with you and outline our funding needs, and I hope you will support them in making that case.
Thank you. Councillor Boylan to Councillor Olszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. This somewhat leads on from Councillor Beale's point. The council are trying to recover from austerity cuts, halved since 2010. And now we wait to see what kind of support we'll get from central government because of the COVID costs. I'm worried about these because I think Bury has had to cut 12 million from their adult social care budget. Walsall have had to cut 13 million from their social care budget. Thurrock has had to cut 500 jobs from its workforce. So I'd like to ask Councillor Olszewski, what's been the impact of the COVID costs on Camden? And what indication have we had from government that it will honour its pledge to do whatever it takes to support local authorities?
Councillor Boylan raises a pertinent question, and it does actually complement the exchanges we've just heard. If you take the COVID impact on the council as being over the current year and the previous year, the total financial pressures that we estimate are £96 million on the council. That arises from lost income from various activities and services, etc., that have ceased during COVID and for which we don't receive revenue, extra spending and delayed savings programmes. The government's support for this, during COVID support for us during this period, is just over 76 million, leaving us with a shortfall of 20 million and no sign of any further COVID funding beyond this year. So I think the short answer to Councillor Boylan's question is no. And yet, despite that, we've managed our best to provide a shield to our communities. You know, Councillor Mason, in the introduction to the debate we've just had on violence against women and girls, has mentioned how we've maintained our financial support for certain services, about 1.2 million, despite austerity and despite the COVID impact. But she very pertinently also said it's the F word. Funding is key for what we want to do. We're doing our damnedest to maintain services, to innovate, etc., to fill the gap and so on. But if we don't get adequate funding from government, then we won't be able to do what we need to do, some of which is, you know, most obviously needs to be done that we heard about tonight. So it's time for the government to act and honour its promise, which so far it hasn't done.
Do you have a supplementary?
I do, thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Mayor. I mean, I'm not really sure I got an answer to the question. Are we going to have to cut from adult social care like Thurrock have, like Bury have, like Walsall have? Are we going to have to cut jobs? Have we had any indications of support from Rishi Sunak in the latest spending review?
As I mentioned briefly in our questions, we've done our best to manage our funds robustly, not just during the pandemic, but since 2010 to as best we can, so that as we entered the pandemic, our finances were about as robust as they possibly could be, given the fact that 50% of government funding has been cut from the council in the previous 10 years. In terms of the adult support, financial support for adult social care within Camden, we're not anticipating any cuts there because we've acted to protect it. And when we
have the option of raising a precept on the council tax for adult social care. We've always honoured that in order to protect as best we can funding for those services. The spending review, as ever, was a bit of smoke and mirrors. Lots of questions remaining unanswered, and we still await the local government finance settlement, so we hear what's going to happen to us. But beware of government claims that say, oh, we're going to increase the core spending power of councils by 3% next year. That sounds good, and obviously we wanted them to say increase rather than decrease, but the fact remains that probably about 50% of that increase is predicated on every single council in England increasing the council tax by the expected permissible limits for next year of 3%. And on top of that, we have to accommodate the increases in national insurance, which were announced earlier in the year to fund adult social care. We have no extra money for that. And the freezing of business rates is, again, something else that has to be met from that 3%. So in many respects, they're letting us down. I look forward to the local government financial statement in December, but I'm not holding my breath for an early Christmas present for us.
Thank you. Councillor Simon to Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Does the Cabinet member agree that Camden's policy on rubbish is throw it on the floor and we'll pick it up?
No, certainly not.
Okay. Supplementary?
Yes, please, Madam Mayor. So the wise people say that the first step to solving the problem is to recognise that there is one. In the Veolia annual service report, the Council talks about a solid year of maintaining and building performance levels. In the Labour Party amendment of the Conservative motion, while it acknowledges recycling rates have missed their target, it claims this represents progress. So my supplementary question or questions is, well, first of all, is being 6 out of 14 in the London boroughs for recycling rates the new Camden standard? And also, how is consistently failing to meet recycling targets progress, and how is endemic fly tipping progress?
Councillor Harrison.
Thanks very much. On the point about recycling, the reason I reference progress is because if you go back 4 years before the start of the current contract, we are actually doing better than we were then, and that's partly because of the decisions we've taken, which some of which are laid out in the amendment I would propose to the Conservative motion. And similarly, in that motion, it set out clearly the role that technology plays in us having really excellent data to understand where there is fly tipping, where it takes place, in order that we can respond as quickly as possible to pick it up. And again, it's noted in the amendments that we respond in 99% of cases within 24 hours. And you know, I get positive feedback pretty much all the time from residents who say, you've responded really quickly, thanks for sorting this out. Because we know where it's happening, that means the figures are high. And we've always encouraged residents, councillors to report ever since the start of the new contract. And that contrasts sharply with boroughs who don't have the same technology that we do, because I don't think they know where the problem is.
Thank you. Councillor Badlani to Councillor Beales. We're on my list. Bad times.
Don't recall raising a question. Apologies.
We can stick with Councillor Beales to keep him on his toes. Councillor Berry.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I asked my written question at the last council meeting about the issue of Camden having so many formally listed assets of community value. And the answer shows the difficulty for community groups in using these powers effectively and using their right to bid. In fact, none have successfully done this in Camden, and we know that several community assets have been sold off. I see lots of examples where a moratorium is triggered and yet the community can't exercise its option to buy because the owners have asked too high a price or just refused to engage. And currently, residents in my ward in Highgate are facing an issue with the Mortimer Terrace Nature Reserve, where the owners have sold not the land, but the holding company to a new owner who is now trying to sell it on. Locally, we've launched an appeal for funds, but the amount they're asking for is a lot now. So what are you doing to track and examine these issues within the council? And what do you think the answer could be for winning more of these battles to get the community owning and running more of its assets?
Thank you very much, Councillor Berry, for the question. And firstly, I just want to associate myself with comments that she and other ward councillors in Highgate have made previously. I know Councillor Wright and Councillor Lewis have been in touch with me about Mortimer Terrace, and I know you've raised it as well. This council very much supports the nature reserve. Has been very clear, and I was very specific in instructing officers to write to the owner during the original intention to sell, to be very clear with them our designation of this space as an open space, the protections through planning policies that brings, and the ACV status and the importance of that to our borough. And I'm pleased that the site is not sold at auction for the time being. But no, more work needs to be done, and I'm very open to meeting the community groups involved and continuing dialogue to see what we can do to bring about a positive resolution to that space and continue to see community access and ideally ownership. I very much would agree. I mean, fundamentally, I think this borough takes a policy of being as facilitative as possible for ACVs. We don't place an exceptionally high threshold. We look at all sorts of evidence about community value and community use. And you can see from the large number of ACVs and redesignations the impacts of that approach. This isn't a piece of funded work for the council. We decide to do that. And I'm very passionate about ACVs. I was very much involved myself in the Black Cap being designated and redesignated an ACV, and that has been very important in ensuring that venue, whilst not open, has not been lost for good. I'm seeing some fantastic reports in the news about opportunities to bring back that valuable space. I think fundamentally one of the problems is it's a community right to bid, not to buy. And we all know, where we see bids successfully, it's often more rural areas, community pubs, much lower land values involved, where perhaps 50, 100 K can be fundraised from community and local efforts. But in Camden, when we see such significant land prices, speculative developments, and the challenges of planning policies and the opportunities for appeal, it is much more difficult. I personally would like to see reform to the underlying legislation, strengthening those community powers. That's something this council would very much support. And in terms of our approach, we're going to continue to seek to support ACVs, to support communities, to bid for ACVs and to renew.
Thank you. Did you have a supplementary?
Just if that's okay. So thank you very much. I appreciate all the problems there are. I also appreciate how helpful Camden's officers are. What we end up with is strong protections in planning, which I think mean we end up, like you say, with the Black Cap, with things that are not sold, but they're not open either. We need to get them back into community use. Now, my view is the law is fairly toothless about this. If an owner simply wants to overprice an asset based on its potential for development, not its use, then we are a little stuck. And the panel you spoke on in City Hall on Friday actually covered this as well. The idea that the only way to really get sustainable infrastructure for LGBTIQA plus community life means ownership of assets. So I think we need a community right to buy in England, like they have in Scotland. So would you consider joining together with me and other opposition members, possibly, to write to the new Secretary of State for levelling up housing and communities, to just press the case for this change in the law based on the evidence that we have in Camden?
Yes, I'm very happy to do that, and I hope all parties will join us in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Going to move on now to item 9, which is a report from the Borough Solicitor on the uncompleted business from the council meetings held on the 11th of October 2021. Could the council please note the report? Yeah, thank you. Item 10 is a report from the Borough Solicitor on appointments to council bodies. There are several nominations set out in the supplementary paper which was circulated. Are there any additional nominations?
Yeah, I just, as the Whips couldn't be here, I just wanted to have an amendment to one of them as Lazarus stepped down as a councillor. We're going to, that will be the position on audit that Lorna takes on, if that makes sense.
Councillor Pearson?
Yeah, can I say, I was disappointed to learn at 2 o'clock this afternoon that I was apparently stepping down from audit and corporate governance, because it was news to me, and I did believe I had the support of the chair, and considering I'd only missed one meeting in 4 years, I'm prepared to believe it was...
Sorry, Councillor Pearson.
Sorry, I was. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Councillor, but just to be clear that.
That means that Simon will stay on audit. Should we just? That's not just that's a change.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm commenting on.
All I was going to comment on, just to its assistance, is that in relation to where members go on committees when you have groups, it's a matter for the group to inform the council, and the council must make those appointments. And I think that's what we'll be doing immediately now.
So could you just clarify that the only change on audit is that Councillor Berry is replacing Councillor...
Oh yeah, I did a bad job. This is why the whips need to do it. It's Councillor Berry, isn't it, that's replacing, not Councillor Russell, sorry.
And I'm still on it, yes.
You're still on. Sorry, that was confusing.
Madam Mayor, can I come in? There. Yeah, about this audit committee. Councillor Lazaro was member of this committee. He's not there anymore, so I thought Simon can stay in there. Yeah?
This committee. Ooh. So, can I ask members to agree the nominations set out in the supplementary paper and made this evening? Agreed. Thank you. Item 11A is the Treasury Management Annual Report and Mid-Year Strategy, which will be introduced by the Cabinet Member for Finance and Transformation. Councillor Olszewski, you have 3 minutes to introduce your report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's good to see everyone is hanging on for this. This is a report that we present to the Council by legislative requirement. It's a combination of an annual report looking at 2020-21 and a sort of mid-year review of our strategy. And in terms of Camden's own financing, the news is that there's basically no news, really. It's sticking to the same investment and borrowing strategy, where we are funding our capital needs through utilising our reserves, the so-called under-borrowing. Our external debt is steady at 329 million, with a capital requirement of about 586, giving us a so-called under-borrowing requirement where we borrow from ourselves of 257 million. This will increase progressively over the coming years, but all within bounds, and then start easing off again. In terms of how we hold our cash and so on, again, it's cautious. We are not indulging in any risky commercial strategies, and the prime consideration for what we do with the monies that we hold is their security. Secondly, it's their liquidity, and it's only as a third priority that we seek to maximise our returns on any of our cash holdings, subject to those preceding requirements. There is, it's been alluded to earlier, there are increases that we have to make, for which we're delegating authority to the Executive Director for Corporate Services on to allow for additional borrowing by the North London Waste Authority. This isn't additional borrowing by Camden, it's because Camden is holding the money for the authorities, more or less. And they are expecting, the authority is expecting to borrow up to about 800 to 850 million to finance further construction and development of the North London Heat and Power project, which will lead to a net reduction in carbon emissions compared to just shoving it in the ground, or waste in the ground, that's to say. We will also increase where we hold funds, the limits on where we hold funds in money market funds with the bank. And because the nature of the project will involve procurement probably from abroad, we will investigate holding euro money market funds, probably in the European Investment Bank, which just goes to show that even though the government has wrenched us out of the European Union, our economy is still tied to continental Europe, and it's good that we are making arrangements to make sure that that works smoothly. The report also makes a very brief reference to work that we're doing on bringing forward proposals on green bonds. There's not much to say at the moment, but we will have more to say in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions? I have Councillor Cooper and Councillor Porritt already.
Thank you. Sorry to make this item last for any longer, but I'm going to reiterate one of the points that I made at the Cabinet, and I would really appreciate Councillor Olszewski making sure that the Council is aware of that request that I made then. You gave a very constructive answer, which is obviously over the last 3 years, on average, SIP has fallen £26 million further behind projections for a total of £78 million change in our fiscal position under SIP over those 3 years. That presents a huge challenge to our reserves and our ability to borrow internally. I believe that borrowing internally is the right approach. I believe this strategy is the right approach. I support expanding money market funds to allow borrowing for the North London Waste Authority if that decision goes ahead, although we can have qualms about whether it should. But can you give this Council assurances that there are sufficient flexibilities in the strategy, or that officers are looking at including them next time round, to make sure that if that fiscal position regarding the capital programme deteriorates any further, we can roll with the punches?
Councillor Porritt, and then we'll...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was interested in the reference to the potential use of green bonds by the Council, and I think the principle of this is something that we should welcome, but there has been a lot of scrutiny in recent months about greenwashing, whereby bonds that are advertised as being green bonds aren't necessarily as green as they claim to be. So what thinking is going on already about making sure that that isn't the case, and that if these bonds are issued, the projects that they invest in reach as high an environmental standard as possible and do what they say on the tin?
Thank you. We'll take Councillor Pearson and then we'll go back.
Yes, I'd just like to repeat the question that I asked of the Deputy earlier on, and he wasn't able to answer it. The 800 to 850 million pounds that the Councillor has just referred to, in the document, it says that will be borrowed within the next few months. Why is it necessary to borrow this large amount, and why isn't it spread over the cost of the over the period of the project?
Councillor Olszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In reply to Councillor Cooper, I'll reiterate the response I gave at Cabinet, which is that without going into the specifics of the Community Investment Programme, which isn't really the purpose of this paper, we are confident that the Council's financing strategy is robust enough to cope with any changes that may arise from SIP, and we are confident that SIP is well managed in any case, and we don't anticipate that that will arise. In response to Councillor Porritt, we absolutely will not engage in greenwashing. It's, as I said, it's very early days yet in how we will develop green bonds, but she knows very well what is driving the Council's policy on tackling climate change, and any use of green bonds will be to further that as best we can. So and remember, this is borrowing. It's not free money. It's borrowing that we will have to earn a return on and repay. So we have to bear that in mind. But it absolutely will not involve greenwashing, I can assure of that. Watch this space. In response to Councillor Pearson, the need to borrow for the North London Waste Authority is that the project, which has already started, by the way, and already £135 million has gone out the door on it, so it's not a paper exercise that we can just sort of, shelve or not shelve. It's already underway, and borrowing has been entered upon to finance that. It's anticipated that we will be taking a significant step next month in terms of procurement for a huge part of the forthcoming works. And it's the nature of massive civil engineering projects, indeed for small civil engineering projects as well, is that it requires some upfront payment as well in order to finance them with whoever you contract with, so we need to have that. And the way the financial markets operate is we can't really borrow on a borrow-as-you-go type basis. So the most efficient way is to, most likely, to make probably, I'm not going to second guess exact amounts, etc., but borrowing a significant amount quite early on, and any obviously unused funds we invest to get some return on them, and all the costs of that are factored into the costs of the project.
Thank you. You are allowed time to sum up if you wanted to, but you may feel like you've said enough. I'm not suggesting either way. Okay. Item 12. Oh no, we have to say it's good. Can I now ask members to agree the recommendation set out in the reference to the agenda? Cool. Now it's item 12. Item 12 is an update following last month's theme debate on COP26 and the climate crisis, which will be introduced by the Cabinet Member for a Sustainable Camden, Councillor Harrison. You have 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank councillors for their contribution to last month's debate and put my thanks on record to the external speakers that we had. The report before you summarises the debate well, I believe, but I would draw attention to the importance of 3 green things. The first being finance and the green bond we're introducing, which Councillor Porritt just asked about. Secondly, retrofit and the importance of stepping up on that, which has close links to finance, and the importance of community action, of which much is going on here in Camden. Since we last met, London has been rated among the top cities in the world on climate action, which is great to hear. That's London as a whole. Sadly, they didn't do a breakdown of boroughs. I really hope we would have done well, but I'm sure that London's success is propelled by the actions and activity of the most ambitious boroughs, and I hope others join us. We have had COP26 take place since we last met. There has been progress made there, but we are still some way off meeting the Paris ambition of 1.5 degrees. The coming follow-up period will be absolutely vital to pressing as hard as we can globally to achieve that. The UK remains president of COP until COP27, and I'm sure everyone here urge the government to put as much resource into continuing dialogue with parties and working to ensure they make good on their commitments and go further in the coming year. The report before Council tonight also refers to Thames Water and recalls the deputation we had from South Hampstead Flood Action Group. Since then, I'm pleased to report that I and Tulip Sadiq MP, along with the Flood Action Group, met, and ward councillors for Swiss Cottage, met with Thames Water and had a useful meeting. I think there's progress. I think they're listening, but there's clearly still some way to go, and there's still a lot more for us to understand about what we need and want from Thames Water. And we expect the formal reports into this summer's flooding to come in the new year. I'm also pleased to report that our sustainability officers, since we last met, have worked quickly to work up a sustainable urban drainage scheme for the South Hampstead area. So thank you again for listening and for continuing to take part in what is the challenge of our times, and look forward to returning to this in future.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the report? I've got Councillor Simon. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to ask about the scrutiny of the Climate Action Plan. I asked about this during the debate, and we had an exchange via email afterwards. And what you said to me was that it's not for you to decide how to be scrutinised, which in a sense is fair enough. In theory, Culture and Environment Committee can indeed decide to scrutinise the programme, but it's a programme that needs ongoing scrutiny, and anyone who sat on the Culture and Environment Scrutiny Committee knows very well how heavy its work programme is. And also during lockdown, the long period of lockdown, scrutiny across the board was reduced to bare bones due to resource constraints. And yet at the same time, we had the Climate Citizens Panel meeting on a regular basis with resources being put into that. And that in itself is a good thing. However, this is a body that has a secret membership and that doesn't publish proper papers. Now, so in a sense, the Cabinet member and his colleagues have decided how to be scrutinised through that way rather than another way. Now, what I'd like to ask him again, really, is why not develop the panel to make the most of its potential? Why not bring it into the public sphere, include councillor representation on some model or another, and surely this would maximise its effectiveness and its credibility on this critical piece of work.
Anyone else? We'll go straight back to Councillor Harrison.
Thanks. I mean, you're right and I'm right in what I've said before, that it's not up to me to choose how to be scrutinised, and I think the Culture and Environment Committee and other committees actually could all look at this as part of their remit, but C&E could have it on their agenda every meeting. I would love to, because I love to come and talk about the work that we're doing, and when I do that, I always get good ideas and great challenge from members, so I'd certainly be happy to do it. There's lots of different formats that committees can adopt. There are panels that have been set up over the years by different scrutiny committees to ensure that ongoing work. In terms of the citizens panel, that's probably, as you know, an element of the increasing focus that we're placing as a council on participative democracy and deliberative democracy and involving our citizens. I don't think it's entirely fair to say it's secret. Actually, the presentations and so on are available online. I don't think the citizens who choose to take part and give up their time to help us on the panel, I don't think their name should be splashed over the internet. That would not be the right approach at all. And it is actually really in keeping with the way in which you conduct participative democracy. I have to say, though, it's not as if they're entirely anonymous. We held our own COP26 event here in King's Cross last month, which was absolutely fantastic, and there were members of the panel there. There was at least one of the panel members who was on the video that we presented to the meeting. So, yeah, so I mean, I really value that piece of work, and I don't think it's choosing how to be scrutinised. I see it as an additional and welcome extra challenge.
Thank you very much. As we only have like 3.5 minutes left, that's not long enough to do a motion. We can take...
Madam Mayor, if we waive our right to have speeches in proposition and seconding, it would be fast enough to have at least one motion. So I'm willing to offer that.
I still don't think you'll pick... Sorry, I still don't think you can... which motion are you talking about? You've still got to propose it and second it, and then we've got to go to a vote. And I don't think you'll do that by 10 o'clock.
Well, I can say I propose the motion and then sit down again without any proposition speech, so that's just done.
Do we want to do that? We have 2.5 minutes.
Consensus is to close.
Yeah, I think the meeting has decided that we don't do that. But with all that toing and froing, we've now lost the time for open debate. So I will now close the meeting by saying there is no urgent business. And the next meeting of the council will be on Monday, the 24th of January, 2022.
Ooh, Christmas.